Welcome to Holoreads. Today, we enter the restless world of post-World War I New Orleans. In Mosquitos, William Faulkner explores artists, desire, ego, and the quiet chaos beneath polite conversation. This is not a story of action. It's a story of minds in motion. Now, relax and let Holoreads take you inside.
Section 0 of Mosquitos. Epigraph. In spring, the sweet young spring, decked out with little green, necklaced, braceleted with the song of idiotic birds, spurious and sweet, and tawdry as a shop girl in her cheap finery, like an idiot with money and no taste. They were little and young and trusting. You could kill them sometimes. But now, as August, like a languorous, replete bird, winged slowly through the pale summer toward the moon of decay and death, they were bigger, vicious, ubiquitous as undertakers, cunning as pawnbrokers, confident and unavoidable as politicians. They came cityward, lustful as country boys, as passionately integral as a college football squad, pervading and monstrous but without majesty. A biblical plague seen through the wrong end of a binocular, the majesty of fate become contemptuous through ubiquity and sheer repetition. End of Section 0, read by Sandra. Section 1 of Mosquitos. Prologue, Part 1. The sex instinct, repeated Mr. Taliaferro in his careful cockney, with that smug complacence with which you plead guilty to a characteristic which you privately consider a virtue, is quite strong in me. Frankness, without which there can be no friendship, without which two people cannot really ever get each other, as you are to say, frankness, as I was saying, I believe. Yes, his host agreed. Would you mind moving a little? He complied with obsequious courtesy, remarking the thin, fretful flashing of the chisel beneath the rhythmic maul. Wood-scented gratefully slid from its mute flashing. And slapping vainly about himself with his handkerchief, he moved in a Bluebeard's closet of blonde hair in severed clots, examining with concern a faint, even powdering of dust upon his neat, small, patent leather shoes. Yes, one must pay a price for art, watching the rhythmic power of the other's back and arm. He speculated briefly upon which was more to be desired, muscularity in an undershirt or his own symmetrical sleeve. And reassured, he continued, frankness compels me to admit that the sex instinct is perhaps my most dominating compulsion. Mr. Taliaferro believed that conversation, not talk, conversation, with an intellectual equal, consisted of admitting as many so-called unpublishable facts as possible about oneself. Mr. Taliaferro often mused with regret on the degree of intimacy he might have established with his artistic acquaintances had he but acquired the habit of masturbation in his youth. But he had not even done this. Yes, his host agreed again, thrusting a hard hip into him. Not at all, murmured Mr. Taliaferro quickly. A harsh wall restored his equilibrium roughly, and hearing a friction of cloth and plaster, he rebounded with repressed alacrity. Pardon me, he chattered. His entire sleeve indicated his arm in gritty white, and regarding his coat with consternation, he moved out of range and sat upon an upturned wooden block. Brushing did no good, and the ungracious surface on which he sat recalling his trousers to his attention, he rose and spread his handkerchief upon it. Whenever he came here, he invariably soiled his clothes. But under that spell put on us by those we admire doing things we ourselves cannot do, he always returned. The chisel bit steadily beneath the slow arc of the maul. His host ignored him. Mr. Taliaferro slapped viciously and vainly at the back of his hand. sitting in lukewarm shadow while light came across roofs and chimney pots, passing through the dingy skylight, becoming weary. His host labored on in the tired light, while the guest sat on his hard block, regretting his sleeve, watching the other's hard body in stained trousers and undershirt, watching the curling vigor of his hair. Outside the window, New Orleans, the view carré, brooded in a faintly tarnished languor like an aging yet still beautiful courtesan in a smoke-filled room. Avid, yet weary too of ardent ways. Above the city, summer was hushed warmly into the bold, weary passion of the sky. Spring and the cruelest months were gone. The cruel months, the wantons that break the fat, hibernatant dullness and comfort of time. August was on the wing, and September, a month of languorous days regretful as wood smoke. But Mr. Taliaferro's youth, or lack of it, troubled him no longer. Thank God. No use to trouble the individual in this room at all. What this room troubled was something eternal in the race, something immortal. And youth is not deathless. Thank God. This unevenly boarded floor, these rough-stained walls broken by high, small, practically useless windows beautifully set, these crouching lintels cutting the immaculate ruined pitch of walls which had housed slaves long ago, slaves long dead and dust with the age that had produced them and which they had served with a kind and gracious dignity. Shades of servants and masters now in a more gracious region, lending dignity to eternity. After all, only a few chosen can accept service with dignity. It is man's impulse to do for himself. It rests with the servant to lend dignity to an unnatural proceeding. And outside, above rooftops becoming slowly violet, summer lay supine, unchaste with decay. As you entered the room, the thing drew your eyes. You turned sharply as to a sound, expecting movement. But it was marble. It could not move. And when you tore your eyes away and turned your back on it at last, you got again, untarnished and high and clean, that sense of swiftness, of space encompassed. But on looking again, it was as before, motionless and passionately eternal, the virginal breastless torso of a girl, headless, armless, legless, in marble temporarily caught and hushed, yet passionate still for escape, passionate and simple and eternal in the equivocal derisive darkness of the world. Nothing to trouble your youth or a lack of it. Rather, something to trouble the very fibrous integrity of your being. Mr. Taliaferro slapped his neck savagely. The manipulator of the chisel and maul ceased his labor and straightened up, flexing his arm and shoulder muscles. And, as though it had graciously waited for him to get done, the light faded quietly and abruptly. The room was like a bathtub after the drain has been opened. Mr. Taliaferro rose also, and his host turned upon him a face like that of a heavy hawk breaking his dream. Mr. Taliaferro regretted his sleeve again, and said briskly, "Then I may tell Mrs. Maurier that you will come?" "What?" the other asked sharply, staring at him. "Oh, hell, I have work to do." "Sorry. Tell her I am sorry." Mr. Taliaferro's disappointment was tinged faintly with exasperation as he watched the other cross the darkening room to a rough wood bench and raise a cheap enamelware water pitcher, gulping from it. "But, I say," said Mr. Taliaferro fretfully. "No, no," the other repeated brusquely, wiping his beard on his upper arm. "Some other time, perhaps. I am too busy to bother with her now. Sorry." He swung back the open door, and from a hook screwed into it, he took down a thin coat and a battered tweed cap. Mr. Taliaferro watched his muscles bulge the thin cloth with envious distaste, recalling anew the unmuscled emphasis of his own press flannel. The other was palpably on the verge of abrupt departure, and Mr. Taliaferro, to whom solitude, particularly dingy solitude, was unbearable, took his stiff straw hat from the bench where it flaunted its wanton gay band above the slim yellow gleam of his straight Malacca stick. "Wait," he said, "and I'll join you." The other paused, looking back. "I'm going out," he stated belligerently. Mr. Taliaferro, at a momentary loss, said fatuously, "Why, I thought I should." The hawk's face brooded above him in the dusk remotely, and he added quickly, "I could return, however. Sure it's no trouble?" "Not at all, my dear fellow, not at all. Only call on me. I will be only too glad to return." "Well, if you're sure it's no trouble, suppose you fetch me a bottle of milk from the grocer on the corner. You know the place, don't you? Here's the empty one." With one of his characteristic plunging movements, the other passed through the door, and Mr. Taliaferro stood in a dapper fretted surprise, clutching a coin in one hand and an unwashed milk bottle in the other. On the stairs, watching the other's shape descending into the well darkness, he stopped again, and, standing on one leg like a crane, he clasped the bottle under his arm and slapped at his ankle, viciously and vainly. End of Section 1. Section 2 of Mosquitos. Prologue, Part 2. Descending a final stair and turning into a darkling corridor, he passed two people indistinguishably kissing, and he hastened on toward the street door. He paused here in active indecision, opening his coat. The bottle had become clammy in his hand. He contemplated it through his sense of touch with acute repugnance. Unseen, it seemed to have become unbearably dirty. He desired something, vaguely, a newspaper perhaps, but before striking a match, he looked quickly over his shoulder. They were gone, hushing their chimed footsteps up the dark curve of the stair. Their chimed tread was like a physical embrace. His match flared a puny fledged gold that followed his clasped gleaming stick as if it were a train of gunpowder. But the passage was empty, swept with chill stone, imminent with weary moisture. The match burned down to the even polished temper of his fingernails and plunged him back into darkness more intense. He opened the street door. Twilight ran in like a quiet violet dog, and nursing his bottle, he peered out across an undimensional feathered square, across stenciled palms and Andrew Jackson in childish effigy, bestriding the terrific arrested plunge of his curly bounced horse, toward the long unemphasis of the Pontalba building and three spires of the cathedral graduated by perspective, pure and slumbrous beneath the decadent languor of August and evening. Mr. Taliaferro thrust his head modestly forth, looking both ways along the street. Then he withdrew his head and closed the door again. He employed his immaculate linen handkerchief reluctantly before thrusting the bottle beneath his coat. It bulged distressingly under his exploring hand, and he removed the bottle in mounting desperation. He struck another match, setting the bottle down at his feet to do so. But there was nothing in which he might wrap the thing. His impulse was to grasp it and hurl it against the wall. Already he pleasured in its anticipated glassy crash. But Mr. Taliaferro was quite honorable. He had passed his word. Or he might return to his friend's room and get a bit of paper. He stood in hot indecision till feet on the stairs descending decided for him. He bent and fumbled for the bottle, struck it, and heard its disconsolate empty flight. Captured it at last, and opening the street door anew, he rushed hurriedly forth. The violet dusk held in soft suspension lights, slow as bell strokes. Jackson Square was now a green and quiet lake, in which abode lights round as jellyfish. feathering with silver mimosa and pomegranate and hibiscus, beneath which lantana and cannas bled and bled. Pontelba and cathedral were cut from black paper and pasted flat on a green sky. Above them, taller palms were fixed in black and soundless explosions. The street was empty, but from Royal Street there came the hum of a trolley that rose to a staggering clatter, passed on and away, leaving an interval filled with the gracious sound of inflated rubber on asphalt, like a tearing of endless silk. Clasping his accursed bottle, feeling like a criminal, Mr. Taliaferro hurried on. He walked swiftly beside a dark wall, passing small, indiscriminate shops dimly lighted with gas and smelling of food of all kinds, fulsome, slightly overripe. The proprietors and their families sat before the doors in tilted chairs. Women nursing babies into slumber spoke in soft South European syllables one to another. Children scurried before him and about him, ignoring him or becoming aware of him, and crouching in shadow like animals, defensive, passive, and motionless. He turned the corner. Royal Street sprang in two directions, and he darted into a grocery store on the corner, passing the proprietor sitting in the door with his legs spread for comfort, nursing the Italian balloon of his belly on his lap. The proprietor removed his short, terrific pipe and belched, rising to follow the customer. Mr. Taliaferro set the bottle down hastily. The grocer belched again, frankly. "Good afternoon," he said in a broad West End accent much nearer the real thing than Mr. Taliaferro's. "Milk, hey?" Mr. Taliaferro extended the coin, murmuring, watching the man's thick, reluctant thighs as he picked up the bottle without repugnance and slid it into a pigeonholed box, and opening a refrigerator beside it, took therefrom a fresh one. Mr. Taliaferro recoiled. "Haven't you a bit of paper to wrap it in?" he asked diffidently. "Why, sure," the other agreed affably. "Make her in a parcel, hey?" He complied with exasperating deliberation. And breathing freer but still oppressed, Mr. Taliaferro took his purchase and, glancing hurriedly about, stepped into the street and paused, stricken. She was under full sail and accompanied by a slimmer one when she saw him. But she tacked at once and came about in a harsh swishing of silk and an expensive clashing of impediments, handbag and chains and beads. Her hand bloomed fatly through bracelets, ringed and manicured, and her hothouse face wore an expression of infantile, trusting astonishment. "Mr. Taliaferro, what a surprise!" she exclaimed, accenting the first word of each phrase, as was her manner. And she really was surprised. Mrs. Maurier went through the world continually amazed at chance, whether or not she had instigated it. Mr. Taliaferro shifted his parcel quickly behind him to its imminent destruction, being forced to accept her hand without removing his hat. He rectified this as soon as possible. "I would never have expected to see you in this part of town at this hour," she continued. "But you have been calling on some of your artist friends, I suppose." The slim one had stopped also, and stood examining Mr. Taliaferro with cool uninterest. The older woman turned to her. "Mr. Taliaferro knows all the interesting people in the quarter, darling. All the people who are creating things. Beautiful things. Beauty, you know." Mrs. Maurier waved her glittering hand vaguely toward the sky in which stars had begun to flower like pale and tarnished gardenias. "Oh, do excuse me, Mr. Taliaferro. This is my niece, Miss Robin, of whom you have heard me speak. She and her brother have come to comfort a lonely old woman." Her glance held a decayed coquetry, and taking his cue, Mr. Taliaferro said, "Nonsense, dear lady. It is we, your unhappy admirers, who need comforting. Perhaps Miss Robin will take pity on us also." He bowed toward the niece with calculated formality. The niece was not enthusiastic. "Now, darling," Mrs. Maurier turned to her niece with rapture. "Here is an example of the chivalry of our Southern men. Can you imagine a man in Chicago saying that?" "Not hardly," the niece agreed. Her aunt rushed on. "That is why I have been so anxious for Patricia to visit me, so she can meet men who are. My niece is named for me, you see, Mr. Taliaferro. Isn't that nice?" She pressed Mr. Taliaferro with recurrent happy astonishment. Mr. Taliaferro bowed again, came within an ace of dropping the bottle, darted the hand which held his hat and stick behind him to steady it. "Charming, charming," he agreed, perspiring under his hair. "But really, I am surprised to find you here at this hour. And I suppose you are as surprised to find us here, aren't you? But I have just found the most wonderful thing. Do look at it, Mr. Taliaferro. I do so want your opinion." She extended to him a dull lead plaque, from which, in dim bas-relief of faded red and blue, simpered a Madonna with an expression of infantile astonishment, identical with that of Mrs. Maurier, and a child somehow smug and complacent, looking as an old man. Mr. Taliaferro, feeling the poised precariousness of the bottle, dared not release his hand. He bent over the extended object. "Do take it, so you can examine it under the light," its owner insisted. Mr. Taliaferro perspired again mildly. The niece spoke suddenly. "I'll hold your package." She moved with young swiftness, and before he could demur, she had taken the bottle from his hands. "Ow!" she exclaimed, almost dropping it herself, and her aunt gushed. "Oh, you have discovered something also, haven't you? Now I've gone and shown you my treasure, and all the while you were concealing something much, much nicer." She waggled her hands to indicate dejection. "You will consider mine trash. I know you will," she went on with heavy, assumed displeasure. "Oh, to be a man, so I could poke around in shops all day and really discover things. Do show us what you have, Mr. Taliaferro." "It's a bottle of milk," remarked the niece, examining Mr. Taliaferro with interest. Her aunt shrieked. Her breast heaved with repression, glinting her pins and beads. "A bottle of milk? Have you turned artist too?" For the first and last time in his life, Mr. Taliaferro wished a lady dead. But he was a gentleman. He only seethed inwardly. He laughed with abortive heartiness. "An artist? You flatter me, dear lady. I'm afraid my soul does not aspire so high. I am content to be merely a—" "Milkman," suggested the young female devil. "Maecenas alone, if I might so style myself." Mrs. Maurier sighed with disappointment and surprise. "Ah, Mr. Taliaferro, I am dreadfully disappointed. I had hoped for a moment that some of your artist friends had at last prevailed on you to give something to the world of art. No, don't say you cannot. I am sure you are capable of it. What with your delicacy of soul, your—" She waved her hand again vaguely toward the sky above Rampart Street. "Ah, to be a man, with no ties save those of the soul. To create. She returned easily to Royal Street. "But really, a bottle of milk, Mr. Taliaferro. Merely for my friend Gordon. I looked in on him this afternoon and found him quite busy, so I ran out to fetch him milk for his supper. These artists," Mr. Taliaferro shrugged, "you know how they live." "Yes, indeed. Genius, a hard taskmaster, isn't it? Perhaps you are wise in not giving your life to it. It is a long, lonely road. But how is Mr. Gordon?" I am so continually occupied with things, unavoidable duties, which my conscience will not permit me to evade. I am very conscientious, you know, that I simply haven't the time to see as much of the quarter as I should like. I have promised Mr. Gordon faithfully to call and to have him to dinner soon. I am sure he thinks I have forgotten him. Please make my peace with him, won't you? Assure him that I have not forgotten him. I am sure he realizes how many calls you have on your time, Mr. Taliaferro assured her gallantly. Don't let that distress you at all. Yes, I really don't know how I get anything done. I am always surprised when I find I have a spare moment for my own pleasure. She turned her expression of happy astonishment on him again. The niece spun slowly and slimly on one high heel, the sweet young curve of her shanks straight and brittle as the legs of a bird, and ending in the twin inky splashes of her slippers, entranced him. Her hat was a small brilliant bell about her face, and she wore her clothing with a casual rakishness, as though she had opened her wardrobe and said, "Let's go downtown." Her aunt was saying, "But what about our yachting party? You gave Mr. Gordon my invitation." Mr. Taliaferro was troubled. "Well, you see, he's quite busy now. He has a commission that will admit of no delay," he concluded with inspiration. "Ah, Mr. Taliaferro, you haven't told him he is invited. Shame on you. Then I must tell him myself, since you have failed me." "No, really." She interrupted him. "Forgive me, dear Mr. Taliaferro. I didn't mean to be unjust. I am glad you didn't invite him. It will be better for me to do it, so I can overcome any scruples he might have. He is quite shy, you know. Oh, quite, I assure you. Artistic temperament, you understand. So spiritual." "Yes," agreed Mr. Taliaferro, covertly watching the niece, who had ceased her spinning and got her seemingly boneless body into an undimensional angular flatness pure as an Egyptian carving. "So I shall attend to it myself. I shall call him tonight. We sail at noon tomorrow, you know. That will allow him sufficient time, don't you think? He's one of these artists who never have much. Lucky people." Mrs. Maurier looked at her watch. "Heavens above, 7:30. We must fly. Come, darling. Can't we drop you somewhere, Mr. Taliaferro?" "Thank you, no. I must take Gordon's milk to him, and then I am engaged for the evening." "Ah, Mr. Taliaferro, it's a woman I know." She rolled her eyes roguishly. "What a terrible man you are." She lowered her voice and tapped him on the sleeve. "Do be careful what you say before this child. My instincts are all bohemian, but she, unsophisticated." Her voice bathed him warmly, and Mr. Taliaferro bridled. Had he had a mustache, he would have stroked it. Mrs. Maurier jangled and glittered again. Her expression became one of pure delight. "But of course, we will drive you to Mr. Gordon's, and then I can run in and invite him for the party. The very thing. How fortunate to have thought of it. Come, darling." Without stooping, the niece angled her leg upward and outward from the knee, scratching her ankle. Mr. Taliaferro recalled the milk bottle and assented gratefully, falling in on the curbside with meticulous thoughtfulness. A short distance up the street, Mrs. Maurier's car squatted expensively. The Negro driver descended and opened the door, and Mr. Taliaferro sank into gracious upholstery, nursing his milk bottle, smelling flowers cut and delicately vased, promising himself a car next year. End of Section 2. Section 3 of Mosquitos. Prologue Part 3. They rolled smoothly, passing between space lights and around narrow corners. while Mrs. Marier talked steadily of hers and Mr. Taliaferro's and Gordon's souls. The niece sat quietly. Mr. Taliaferro was conscious of the clean young odor of her, like that of young trees, and when they passed beneath lights he could see her slim shape and the impersonal revelation of her legs and her bare sexless knees. Mr. Taliaferro luxuriated, clutching his bottle of milk, wishing the ride need not end. But the car drew up to the curb again, and he must get out, no matter with what reluctance. "I'll run up and bring him down to you," he suggested, with premonitory tact. No, let's all go up," Mrs. Marier objected. "I want Patricia to see how genius looks at home." "Gee, Auntie, I've seen these dives before," the niece said. "They're everywhere. I'll wait for you." She jackknifed her body effortlessly, scratching her ankles with her brown hands. "It's so interesting to see how they live, darling. You'll simply love it." Mr. Taliaferro demurred again, but Mrs. Marier overrode him with sheer words, so against his better judgment he struck matches for them, leading the way up the dark, tortuous stairs, while their three shadows aped them, rising and falling monstrously upon the ancient wall. Long before they reached the final stage, Mrs. Marier was puffing and panting, and Mr. Taliaferro found a puerile, vengeful glee in hearing her labored breath. But he was a gentleman. He put this from him, rebuking himself. He knocked on a door, was bidden, opened it. "Back, are you?" Gordon sat in his single chair, munching a thick sandwich, clutching a book. The unshaded light glared savagely upon his undershirt. "You have callers," Mr. Taliaferro offered his belated warning, but the other, looking up, had already seen beyond his shoulder Mrs. Marier's interested face. He rose and cursed Mr. Taliaferro, who had begun immediately his unhappy explanation. Mrs. Marier insisted on dropping in. Mrs. Marier vanquished him anew. "Mr. Gordon," she sailed into the room, bearing her expression of happy astonishment like a round platter stood on edge. "How do you do? Can you ever forgive us for intruding like this?" She went on in her gushing italics. "We just met Mr. Taliaferro on the street with your milk, and we decided to brave the lion in his den. How do you do?" She forced her effusive hand upon him, staring about in happy curiosity. "So this is where genius labors. How charming. So original. And that," she indicated a corner screened off by a draggled length of green rep, "is your bedroom, isn't it? How delightful. Ah, Mr. Gordon, how I envy you this freedom. And a view. You have a view also, haven't you?" She held his hand and stared entranced at a high, useless window framing two tired-looking stars of the fourth magnitude. "I would have if I were 8 feet tall," he corrected. She looked at him quickly, happily. Mr. Taliaferro laughed nervously. "That would be delightful," she agreed readily. "I was so anxious to have my niece see a real studio, Mr. Gordon, where a real artist works. Darling," she glanced over her shoulder fatly, still holding his hand. "Darling, let me present you to a real sculptor, one from whom we expect great things." "Darling," she repeated in a louder tone. The niece, untroubled by the stares, had drifted in after them, and she now stood before the single marble. "Come and speak to Mr. Gordon, darling." Beneath her aunt's saccharine modulation was a faint trace of something not so sweet after all. The niece turned her head and nodded slightly without looking at him. Gordon released his hand. "Mr. Taliaferro tells me you have a commission." Mrs. Marier's voice was again a happy, astonished honey. "May we see it?" "I know artists don't like to exhibit an incomplete work, but just among friends, you see. You both know how sensitive to beauty I am, though I have been denied the creative impulse myself." "Yes," agreed Gordon, watching the niece. "I have long intended visiting your studio, as I promised, you remember, so I shall take this opportunity of looking about. Do you mind?" "Help yourself. Taliaferro can show you things. Pardon me." He lurched characteristically between them, and Mrs. Marier chanted. "Yes, indeed, Mr. Taliaferro, like myself, is sensitive to the beautiful in art. Ah, Mr. Taliaferro, why were you and I given a love for the beautiful, yet denied the ability to create it from stone and wood and clay?" Her body in its brief, simple dress was motionless when he came over to her. After a time, he said, "Like it?" Her jaw and profile was heavy. There was something masculine about it. But in full face it was not heavy, only quiet. Her mouth was full and colorless, unpainted, and her eyes were opaque as smoke. She met his gaze, remarking the icy blueness of his eyes, like a surgeon's, she thought, and looked at the marble again. "I don't know," she answered slowly. Then, "It's like me." "How like you?" he asked gravely. She didn't answer. Then she said, "Can I touch it?" "If you like," he replied, examining the line of her jaw, her firm, brief nose. She made no move, and he added, "Aren't you going to touch it?" "I've changed my mind," she told him calmly. Gordon glanced over his shoulder to see where Mrs. Maurier pored volubly over something. Mr. Taliaferro eyed her with restrained passion. "Why is it like you?" he repeated. She said irreverently, "Why hasn't she anything here?" Her brown hand flashed slimly across the high unemphasis of the marble's breast and withdrew. "You haven't much there yourself." She met his gaze steadily. "Why should it have anything there?" he asked. "You're right," she agreed with the judicial complacence of an equal. "I see now. Of course she shouldn't. I didn't quite get it for a moment." Gordon examined with growing interest her flat breast and belly, her boy's body, which the poise of it and the thinness of her arms belied, sexless yet somehow vaguely troubling. Perhaps just young, like a calf or a colt. "How old are you?" he asked abruptly. 18, if it's any of your business," she replied, without rancor, staring at the marble. Suddenly she looked up at him again. "I wish I could have it," she said with sudden sincerity and longing, quite like a 4-year-old. "Thanks," he said. "That was quite sincere, too, wasn't it? Of course you can't have it, though. You see that, don't you?" She was silent. He knew she could see no reason why she shouldn't have it. "I guess so," she agreed at last. "I just thought I'd see, though." "Not to overlook any bets?" "Oh, well, by tomorrow I probably won't want it anyway. And if I still do, I can get something just as good." "You mean," he amended, "that if you still want it tomorrow, you can get it, don't you?" Her hand, as if it were a separate organism, reached out slowly, stroking the marble. "Why are you so black?" she asked. "Black?" "Not your hair and beard. I like your red hair and beard. But you are black, I mean." Her voice fell, and he suggested, "Soul?" "I don't know what that is," she stated quietly. "Neither do I. You might ask your aunt, though. She seems familiar with souls." She glanced over her shoulder, showing him her other unequal profile. "Ask her yourself. Here she comes." Mrs. Maurier surged her scented, upholstered bulk between them. "Wonderful, wonderful," she was exclaiming in sincere astonishment. "And this—" Her voice died away, and she gazed at the marble, dazed. Mr. Taliaferro echoed her immaculately, taking to himself the showman's credit. "Do you see what he has caught?" he bugled melodiously. "Do you see? The spirit of youth, of something fine and hard and clean in the world, something we all desire until our mouths are stopped with thirst." Desire, with Mr. Taliaferro, had long since become an unfulfilled habit, requiring no longer any particular object at all. "Yes," agreed Mrs. Maurier. "How beautiful." What does it signify, Mr. Gordon?" "Nothing, Aunt Pat," the niece snapped. "It doesn't have to." "But really, what do you want us to signify? Suppose it signified a dog or an ice cream soda. What difference would it make? Isn't it all right like it is?" "Yes, indeed, Mrs. Maurier," Mr. Taliaferro agreed with soothing haste. "It is not necessary that it have objective significance. We must accept it for what it is. Pure form, untrammeled by any relation to a familiar or utilitarian object. Oh yes, untrammeled. Here was a word Mrs. Maurier knew. The untrammeled spirit, freedom like the eagle's. "Shut up, Auntie," the niece told her. "Don't be a fool." "But it has what Taliaferro calls objective significance," Gordon interrupted brutally. "This is my feminine ideal. A virgin with no legs to leave me, no arms to hold me, no head to talk to me. Mr. Gordon. Mrs. Maria stared at him over her compressed breast. Then she thought of something that did possess objective significance. I had almost forgotten our reason for calling so late. Not, she added quickly, that we needed any other reason to. Mr. Taliaferro, how was it those old people used to put it, about pausing on life's busy high road to kneel for a moment at the Master's feet? Mrs. Marier's voice faded, and her face assumed an expression of mild concern. Or is it the Bible of which I am thinking? Well, no matter. We dropped in to invite you for a yachting party a few days on the lake. Yes, Taliaferro told me about it. Sorry, but I shall be unable to come. Mrs. Marier's eyes became quite round. She turned to Mr. Taliaferro. Mr. Taliaferro, you told me you hadn't mentioned it to him. Mr. Taliaferro writhed acutely. Do forgive me if I left you under that impression. It was quite unintentional. I only desired that you speak to him yourself and make him reconsider. The party will not be complete without him, will it? Not at all, really, Mr. Gordon. Won't you reconsider? Surely you won't disappoint us. She stooped creaking and slapped at her ankle. Pardon me. No, sorry, I have work to do. Mrs. Marier transferred her expression of astonishment and dejection to Mr. Taliaferro. It can't be that he doesn't want to come. There must be some other reason. Do say something to him, Mr. Taliaferro. We simply must have him. Mr. Fairchild is going, and Eva and Dorothy. We simply must have a sculptor. Do convince him, Mr. Taliaferro. I'm sure his decision is not final. I am sure he will not deprive us of his company. A few days on the water will do him no end of good, freshen him up like a tonic, eh, Gordon? Gordon's hawk face brooded above them, remote and insufferable with arrogance. Vindis had turned away, drifting slowly about the room, grave and quiet and curious, straight as a poplar. Mrs. Marier implored him with her eyes, dog-like, temporarily silent. Suddenly she had an inspiration. Come, people, let's all go to my house for dinner, and we can discuss it at our ease. Mr. Taliaferro demurred. I am engaged this evening, you know, he reminded her. Oh, Mr. Taliaferro, she put her hand on his sleeve. Don't you fail me, too. I always depend on you when people fail me. Can't you defer your engagement? Really, I am afraid not in this case, Mr. Taliaferro replied smugly, though I am distressed. Mrs. Marier sighed. These women, Mr. Taliaferro is perfectly terrible with women, she informed Gordon. But you will come, won't you? The niece had drifted up to them and stood rubbing the calf of one leg against the other shin. Gordon turned to her. Will you be there? Damn their little souls, she whispered on a sucked breath. She yawned. Oh yes, I eat, but I am going to bed darn soon. She yawned again, patting the broad pale oval of her mouth with brown fingers. Patricia, her aunt exclaimed in shocked amazement. Of course you will do nothing of the kind. The very idea. Come, Mr. Gordon. No thanks, I am engaged myself, he answered stiffly. Some other time, perhaps. I simply won't take no for an answer. Do help me, Mr. Taliaferro. He simply must come. Do you want him to come as he is? The niece asked. Her aunt glanced briefly at the undershirt and shuddered, but she said bravely, Of course, if he wishes. What are clothes compared with this? She described an arc with her hand. Diamonds glittered on its orbit. So you cannot evade it, Mr. Gordon. You must come. Her hand poised above his arm, pouncing. He eluded it brusquely. Excuse me. Mr. Taliaferro avoided his sudden movement just in time, and the niece said wickedly, There's a shirt behind the door, if that's what you are looking for. You won't need a tie with that beard. He picked her up by the elbows, as you would a high, narrow table, and set her aside. Then his tall, controlled body filled and emptied the door and disappeared in the darkness of the hallway. The niece gazed after him. Mrs. Marier stared at the door, then to Mr. Taliaferro in quiet amazement. What in the world? Her hands clashed vainly among her various festooned belongings. Where is he going? She said at last. The niece said suddenly, I like him. She too gazed at the door through which passing. He seemed to have emptied the room. I bet he doesn't come back, she remarked. Her aunt shrieked. Doesn't come back? Well, I wouldn't if I were him. She returned to the marble, stroking it with slow desire. Mrs. Maurier gazed helplessly at Mr. Taliaferro. "Where?" she began. "I'll go see," he offered, breaking his own trance. The two women regarded his vanishing, neat back. "Never in my life. Patricia, what did you mean by being so rude to him? Of course he's offended. Don't you know how sensitive artists are? After I've worked so hard to cultivate him, too. Nonsense. It'll do him good. He thinks just a little too well of himself as it is. But to insult the man in his own house, I can't understand you young people at all. Why, if I'd said a thing like that to a gentleman and a stranger, I can't imagine what your father can mean, letting you grow up like this. He certainly knows better than this. I'm not to blame for the way he acted. You are the one yourself. Suppose you'd been sitting in your room in your shimmy and a couple of men you hardly knew had walked in on you and tried to persuade you to go somewhere you didn't want to go. What would you have done? These people are different, her aunt told her coldly. You don't understand them. Artists don't require privacy as we do. It means nothing whatever to them. But anyone, artist or no, would object. Oh, haul in your sheet, the niece interrupted coarsely. You're jibbing. Mr. Taliaferro reappeared panting with delicate repression. Gordon was called hurriedly away. He asked me to make his excuses and to express his disappointment over having to leave so unceremoniously. Then he's not coming to dinner, Mrs. Maurier sighed, feeling her rage, the immense of dark and death. She seemed not only unable to get new men any more, but to hold the old ones even. Mr. Taliaferro, too. Age. She sighed again. Come, darling, she said in a strangely chastened tone, quieter, pitiable in a way. The niece put both her firm tanned hands on the marble. Hard. Oh, beautiful, she whispered in salutation and farewell, turning quickly away. Let's go, she said. I'm starving. Mr. Taliaferro had lost his box of matches. He was desolated. So they were forced to feel their way down the stairs, disturbing years and years of dust upon the rail. The stone corridor was cool and dank and filled with a suppressed minor humming. They hurried on. Night was fully calm, and the car squatted at the curb in patient silhouette. The Negro driver sat within, with all the windows closed. Within its friendly familiarity, Mrs. Maurier's spirits rose again. She gave Mr. Taliaferro her hand, sugaring her voice again with a decayed coquetry. You will call me then, but don't promise. I know how completely your time is taken up. She leaned forward, tapping him on the cheek. Don Juan. He laughed deprecatingly with pleasure. The niece from her corner said, Good evening, Mr. Tarver. Mr. Taliaferro stood slightly inclined from the hips, frozen. He closed his eyes like a dog awaiting the fall of the stick, while time passed and passed. He opened his eyes again, after how long he knew not, but Mrs. Maurier's fingers were but leaving his cheek, and the niece was invisible in her corner, a bodiless evil. Then he straightened up, feeling his cold entrails resume their proper place. The car drew away, and he watched it, thinking of the girl's youngness, her hard, clean youngness, with fear and a troubling, unhappy desire like an old sorrow. Were children really like dogs? Could they penetrate one's concealment, know one instinctively? Mrs. Maurier settled back comfortably. Mr. Taliaferro is perfectly terrible with women, she informed her niece. I bet he is, the niece agreed. Perfectly terrible. End of Section 3, read by Bryce Cries, Ohio. Section 4 of Mosquitos. Prologue, Section 4. Mr. Taliaferro had been married while quite young by a rather plain-faced girl whom he was trying to seduce. But now, at 38, he was a widower these 8 years. He had been the final result of some rather casual biological research conducted by two people who, like the great majority, had no business producing children at all. The family originated in northern Alabama and drifted slowly westward ever after, thus proving that a certain racial impulse in the race, which one Horace Greeley summed up in a slogan so excruciatingly apt that he didn't have to observe it himself, has not yet died away. His brothers were various, and they attained their several milieus, principally by chance, milieus ranging from an untimely heaven via someone else's horse and a rope and a Texas cottonwood, through a classical chair in a small Kansas college, to a state legislature via someone else's votes. This one got as far as California. They never did know what became of Mr. Taliaferro's sister. Mr. Taliaferro had got what is known as a careful raising. He had been forced while quite young and pliable to do all the things to which his natural impulses objected, and to forego all the things he could possibly have had any fun doing. After a while, nature gave up, and this became a habit with him. Nature surrendered him without a qualm. Even disease germs seemed to ignore him. His marriage had driven him into work as drought drives a fish downstream into the larger waters, and things had gone hard with them during the years during which he had shifted from position to position, correspondence course to correspondence course, until he had an incorrect and impractical smattering of information regarding every possible genteel method of gaining money, before finally and inevitably gravitating into the women's clothing section of a large department store. Here he felt he had at last come into his own. He always got along much better with women than with men, and his restored faith in himself enabled him to rise with comfortable ease to the coveted position of wholesale buyer. He knew women's clothes and interested in women. It was his belief that knowledge of the frail, intimate things they preferred gave him an insight which no other man had into the psychology of women. But he merely speculated on this, for he remained faithful to his wife, although she was bedridden and invalid. And then, when success was in his grasp, and life had become smooth at last for them, his wife died. He had become habituated to marriage, sincerely attached to her, and readjustment came slowly. Yet in time he became accustomed to the novelty of mature liberty. He had been married so young that freedom was an unexplored field to him. He took pleasure in his snug bachelor quarters in the proper neighborhood, in his solitary routine of days, of walking home in the dusk for the sake of his figure, examining the soft bodies of girls on the street, knowing that if he cared to take one of them, there is none save the girls themselves to say him nay, to his dinners alone or in company with an available literary friend. Mr. Taliaferro did Europe in 41 days, gained thereby a worldly air and a smattering of aesthetics and a precious accent, and returned to New Orleans feeling that he was complete. His only alarm was his thinning hair. His only worry was the fact that someone would discover that he had been born Tarver, not Taliaferro. But long since, celibacy had begun to oppress him. End of Section 4, read by Bryce Cries, Ohio. Section 5 of Mosquitos. Handling his stick smartly, he turned into Brossard's. As he had hoped, here was Dawson Fairchild, the novelist, resembling a benevolent walrus too recently out of bed to have made a toilet, dining in company with 3 men. Mr. Taliaferro paused diffidently on the way to the door, and a rosy-cheeked waiter resembling a studious Harvard undergraduate in an actor's dinner coat assailed him courteously. At last he caught Fairchild's eye, and the other greeted him across the small room, then said something to his 3 companions that caused them to turn half around in their chairs to watch his approach. Mr. Taliaferro, to whom entering a restaurant alone and secluding a table was an excruciating process, joined them with relief. The cherubic waiter spun a chair from an adjoining table deftly against Mr. Taliaferro's knees as he shook Fairchild's hand. "You're just in time," Fairchild told him, propping his fist in a clutched fork on the table. "This is Mr. Hopper. You know these other folks, I think?" Mr. Taliaferro ducked his head to a man with iron-gray hair and an orotund, humorless face, like that of a thwarted Sunday school superintendent who insisted on shaking his hand. Then his glance took in the other 2 members of the party, a tall, ghostly young man with a thin evaporation of fair hair and a pale, prehensile mouth, and a bald Semitic man with a pasty, loose-jowled face and sad, quizzical eyes. "We were discussing," began Fairchild, when the stranger interrupted with a bland and utterly unself-conscious rudeness. "What did you say the name was?" he asked, fixing Mr. Taliaferro with his eye. Mr. Taliaferro met the eye and knew immediately a faint unease. He answered the question, but the other brushed the reply aside. "I mean your given name. I didn't catch it today." "Why, Ernest, Mr. Taliaferro told him with alarm. Ah, yes, Ernest. You must pardon me, but traveling, meeting new faces each Tuesday as I do. He interrupted himself with the same bland unconsciousness. What are your impressions of the get-together today? Ere Mr. Taliaferro could have replied, he interrupted himself again. You have a splendid organization here, he informed them generally, compelling them with his glance, and a city that is worthy of it, except for the southern laziness of yours. You folks need more northern blood to bring out all your possibilities. Still, I won't criticize. You boys have treated me pretty well. He put some food into his mouth and chewed it down hurriedly, forestalling anyone who might have hoped to speak. I was glad that my itinerary brought me here to see the city and be with the boys today, and that one of your reporters gave me a chance to see something of your bohemian life by directing me to Mr. Fairchild here, who, I understand, is an author. He met Mr. Taliaferro's expression of courteous amazement again. I am glad to see how you boys are carrying on the good work, I might say the Master's work, for it is only by taking the Lord into our daily lives. He stared at Mr. Taliaferro once more. What did you say the name was? Ernest, suggested Fairchild mildly. Ernest. People, the man in the street, the breadwinner, he on whom the heavy burden of life rests. Does he know what we stand for? What we can give him in spite of himself? Forgetfulness of the trials of the day by day? He knows nothing of our ideas of service, of the benefits to ourselves, to each other, to you. He met Fairchild's burly, quizzical gaze, to himself. And, by the way, he added, coming to earth again, there are a few points on this subject I am going to take up with your secretary tomorrow. He transfixed Mr. Taliaferro again. What were your impressions of my remarks today? I beg pardon? What did you think of my ideas for getting 100% church attendance by keeping them afraid they'd miss something good by staying away? Mr. Taliaferro turned his stricken face to the others, one by one. After a while, his interrogator said in a tone of cold displeasure, You don't mean to say you do not recall me? Mr. Taliaferro cringed. Really, sir, I am distressed. The other interrupted heavily. You were not at lunch today? No, Mr. Taliaferro replied with evasive gratitude. I take only a glass of buttermilk at noon. I breakfast late, you see. The other man stared at him with chill displeasure, and Mr. Taliaferro added with inspiration, You have mistaken me for someone else, I fear. The stranger regarded Mr. Taliaferro for a cold moment. The waiter placed a dish before Mr. Taliaferro, and he fell upon it in a flurry of acute discomfort. Do you mean, began the stranger. Then he put his fork down and turned his disapproval coldly upon Fairchild. Didn't I understand you to say that this gentleman was a member of Rotary? Mr. Taliaferro suspended his fork, and he too looked at Fairchild in shocked unbelief. I, a member of Rotary? He repeated. Why, I kind of got the impression he was, Fairchild admitted. Hadn't you heard that Taliaferro was a Rotarian? He appealed to the others. They were non-committal, and he continued. I seem to recall somebody telling me you were a Rotarian. But then, you know how rumors get around. Maybe it is because of your prominence in the business life of our city. Taliaferro is a member of one of our largest ladies' clothing houses, he explained. He is just the man to help you figure out some way to get God into the mercantile business. Teach him the meaning of service, hey, Taliaferro? No, really, Mr. Taliaferro objected with alarm. The stranger interrupted again. Well, there's nothing better on God's green earth than Rotary. Mr. Fairchild had given me to understand that you were a member, he accused with a recurrence of cold suspicion. Mr. Taliaferro squirmed with unhappy negation. The other stared him down. Then he took out his watch. Well, I must run along. I run my day to schedule. You'd be astonished to learn how much time can be saved by cutting off a minute here and a minute there, he informed them. And, I beg pardon? What do you do with them? Fairchild asked. When you cut off enough minutes here and there to make up a sizable mess, what do you do with them? Setting a time limit to everything you do makes a man get more punched into it. Makes him take the hills on high, you might say. A drop of nicotine on the end of the tongue will kill a dog, Fairchild thought, chuckling to himself. He said aloud, Our forefathers reduced the process of gaining money to proverbs, but we have beaten them. We have reduced the whole of existence to fetishes. To words of one syllable that will look well in a large red type, the Semitic man corrected. The stranger ignored him. He half turned in his chair. He gestured at the waiter's back, and he snapped his fingers until he had attracted the waiter's attention. Trouble with these small, second-rate places, he told him. No pep, no efficiency in handling trade. Check, please, he directed briskly. The cherubic waiter bent over them. You found the dinner nice, he suggested. Sure, all right. Bring the bill, will you, George? The waiter looked at the others, hesitating. Never mind, Mr. Brossard, Fairchild said quickly. We won't go right now. Mr. Hooper here has got to catch a train. You are my guest, he explained to the stranger. The other protested conventionally. He offered to match coins for it, but Fairchild repeated, You are my guest tonight. Too bad you must hurry away. I haven't got the leisure you New Orleans fellows have, the other explained. Got to keep on the jump myself. He arose and shook hands all around. Glad to have met you, boys, he said to each in turn. He clasped Mr. Taliaferro's elbow with his left hand while their rights were engaged. The waiter fetched his hat, and he gave the man a $50 with a flourish. If you're ever in the little city, he paused to reassure Fairchild. Sure, Fairchild agreed heartedly, and they sat down again. The late guest paused at the street door a moment. Then he darted forth shouting, Taxi, taxi! The cab took him to the Montillon Hotel, 3 blocks away, where he purchased 2 tomorrow's papers, and he sat in the lobby for an hour, dozing over them. Then he went to his room and lay in bed staring at them until he had harried his mind into unconsciousness by sheer idiocy of print. End of Section 5. Read by Chris Buchanan, Springfield, Illinois, June 6, 2023. Section 6. Mosquitos by William Faulkner. Prologue, Part 6. Now, said Fairchild, let that be a lesson to you young men. That's what you'll come to by joining things, by getting the habit of it. As soon as a man begins to join clubs with lodges, his spiritual fiber begins to disintegrate. When you are young, you join things because they profess high ideas. You believe in ideas at that age, you know, which is all right as long as you just believe in them as ideas and not as criterions of conduct. But after a while, you join more things, you are getting older and more sedate and sensible, and believing in ideas is too much trouble, so you begin to live up to them with your outward life, in your contacts with other people. And when you've made a form of behavior out of an ideal, it's not an ideal any longer, and you become a public nuisance. It's a man's own fault if the fetish men annoy him, the Semitic man said. Nowadays there are enough things for everyone to belong to something. That's a rather stiff price to pay for immunity, though, Fairchild objected. That need not bother you, the other told him. You have already paid it. Mr. Taliaferro laid aside his fork. I do hope he's not offended, he murmured. Fairchild chuckled. At what? The Semitic man asked. He and Fairchild regarded Mr. Taliaferro kindly. At Fairchild's little joke, Mr. Taliaferro explained. Fairchild laughed. I'm afraid we disappointed him. He probably not only does not believe that we are bohemians, but doubts that we are even artistic. Probably the least he expected was to be taken to dinner at the studio of 2 people who are not married to each other, and to be offered hashish instead of food. And to be seduced by a girl in an orange smock and no stockings, the ghostly young man added in a sepulchral tone. Yes, Fairchild said, but he wouldn't have succumbed, though. No, the Semitic man agreed, but like any Christian, he would have liked the opportunity to refuse. Yes, that's right, Fairchild admitted. He said, I guess he thinks if you don't stay up all night and get drunk and ravish somebody, there's no use in being an artist. Which is worse, murmured the Semitic man. God knows, Fairchild answered. I've never been ravished. He sucked at his coffee. But he's not the first man that ever hoped to be ravished and was disappointed. I've spent a lot of time in different places laying myself open and always come off undefiled. Hey, Taliaferro. Mr. Taliaferro squirmed again diffidently. Fairchild lit a cigarette. Well, both of them are vices, and we've all seen tonight what an uncontrolled vice will lead a man into. Defining a vice as any natural impulse which rides you, like the gregarious instinct in Hooper, he ceased a while. Then he chuckled again. God must look about our American scene with a good deal of consternation, watching the antics of these volunteers who are trying to help him, or entertainment, the Semitic man amended. But why American scene? Because our doings are so much more comical. Other nations seem to be able to entertain the possibility that God may not be a Rotarian or an elk or a Boy Scout after all. We don't. And convictions are always alarming unless you are looking at them from behind. The waiter approached with a box of cigars. The Semitic man took one. Mr. Taliaferro finished his dinner with decorous expedition. The Semitic man said, My people produced Jesus. Your people Christianized him. And ever since you have been trying to get him out of your church. And now that you have practically succeeded, look at what is filling the vacuum of his departure. Do you think that your new idea of willy-nilly service without request or recourse is better than your old ideal of humanity? No, as the other would have spoken. I don't mean as far as results go. The only ones who ever gain by spiritual machinations of mankind are the small minority who gain emotional or mental or physical exercise from the activity itself. Now for the passive majority for whom the crusade is set afoot. Catharsis by peristalsis, murmured the blond young man who was nurturing a reputation for cleverness. Fairchild said, Are you opposed to religion then, in its general sense, I mean? Certainly not, the Semitic man answered. The only sense in which religion is general is when it benefits the greatest number in the same way. And the universal benefit of religion is that it gets the children out of the house on Sunday morning. But education gets them out of the house 5 days a week, Fairchild pointed out. That's true too, but I am not at home myself on those days. Education has already got me out of the house 6 days a week. The waiter brought Mr. Taliaferro's coffee. Fairchild lit another cigarette. So you believe the sole accomplishment of education is that it keeps us away from home? What other general result can you name? It doesn't make us all brave or healthy or happy or wise. It doesn't even keep us married. In fact, to take an education by modern process is like marrying in haste and spending the rest of your life making the best of it. But understand me. I have no quarrel with education. I don't think it hurts you much, except to make you unhappy and unfit for work, for which man was cursed by the gods before they had learned about education. And if it were not education, it would be something else just as bad, or perhaps worse. Man must fill his time some way, you know. But to go back to religion, the spirit Protestant eternal, murmured the blond young man hoarsely. Do you mean any particular religion, or just the general teaching of Christ? What has Christ to do with it? Well, it's generally accepted that he instigated a certain branch of it, whatever his motives really were. It's generally accepted that first you must have an effect to discern a cause. And it is a human trait to foist the blunders of the age and the race upon someone or something too remote or heedless or weak to resist. But when you say religion, you have a particular sect in mind, haven't you? Yes, Fairchild admitted. I always think of the Protestant religion. The worst of all, the Semitic man said. To raise children into, I mean. For some reason one can be a Catholic or a Jew and be religious at home. But a Protestant at home is only a Protestant. It seems to me that the Protestant faith was invented for the sole purpose of filling our jails and morgues and houses of detention. I speak now of its more rabid manifestations, particularly of its activity in smaller settlements. How do young Protestant boys in small towns spend Sunday afternoons with baseball and all such natural muscular vents denied them? They kill, they slay, and steal, and burn. Have you ever noticed how many juvenile firearm accidents occur on Sunday? How many fires in barns and outhouses happen on Sunday afternoon? He ceased and shook the ash from his cigar carefully into his coffee cup. Mr. Taliaferro, seeing an opening, coughed and spoke. By the way, I saw Gordon today. Tried to persuade him for our yachting party tomorrow. He doesn't enthuse, so to speak, though I assured him how much we'd all like to have him. Oh, he'll come, I guess, Fairchild said. He'd be a fool not to let her feed him for a few days. He'd pay a fairly high price for his food, the Semitic man remarked dryly. Fairchild looked at him and he added, Gordon hasn't served his apprenticeship yet, you know. You've got through yours. Oh, Fairchild grinned. Well, yes. I kind of play out on her, I reckon. He turned to Mr. Taliaferro. Has she been to him in person to sell him the trip yet? Mr. Taliaferro hid his mild retrospective discomfort behind a lighted match. Yes, she stopped in this afternoon. I was with him at the time. Good for her, the Semitic man applauded, and Fairchild said with interest, She did. What did Gordon say? He left, Mr. Taliaferro admitted mildly. Walked out on her, did he? Fairchild glanced briefly at the Semitic man. He laughed. You are right, he agreed. He laughed again, and Mr. Taliaferro said, He really should come, you know. I thought perhaps, diffidently, that you'd help me persuade him. The fact that you will be with us in your assured position in the creative world. No, I guess not, Fairchild decided. I'm not much of a hand for changing folks' opinion. I guess I won't meddle with it. But really, Mr. Taliaferro persisted, the trip would benefit the man's work. Besides, he added with inspiration, he will round out our party. A novelist, a painter. I'm invited too, the blond young man put in sepulchrally. Mr. Taliaferro accepted him with an apologetic effusion. By all means, a poet. I was about to mention you, my dear fellow. 2 poets, in fact, with Eva... I am the best poet in New Orleans, the other interrupted with a sepulchral belligerence. Yes, Mr. Taliaferro agreed quickly. And a sculptor, you see. He appealed to the Semitic man. The Semitic man met Mr. Taliaferro's inopportune gaze kindly, without reply. Fairchild turned to him. Well, he began. Then, what do you think? The Semitic man glanced briefly at him. I think we'll need Gordon by all means. Fairchild grinned again and agreed. Yes, I guess you're right. End of section 6. Read by Chris Buchanan, Springfield, Illinois, June 6, 2023. Section 7. Mosquitos by William Faulkner. The waiter brought Fairchild's change and stood courteously beside them as they rose. Mr. Taliaferro caught Fairchild's eye and leaned near, diffidently, lowering his tone. Eh? Fairchild said in his burly, jovial voice, not lowering it. Would like a moment if you've time. Your advice. Not tonight, Fairchild asked in alarm. Why, yes. Mr. Taliaferro was faintly apologetic. Just a few moments, if you are alone. He gestured meaningly with his head towards the other 2. No, not tonight. Julius and I are spending the evening together. Mr. Taliaferro's face fell, and Fairchild added kindly, some other time, perhaps. Yes, of course, Mr. Taliaferro agreed faultlessly. Some other time. End of section 7. Section 8 of Mosquitos by William Faulkner. Prologue, Part 8. The car swept sibilantly up the drive and on around the house. There was a light on the veranda vaguely beyond vines. They descended, and Miss Marrier crossed the veranda and passed clashing and jangling through a French window. The niece turned round the corner and followed the veranda to where beyond a nook, spaced with wicker and chintz, and magazines gaily on a table, her brother sat coatless on a divan beneath a wall lamp. There was a faint litter of shavings about his feet and clinging to his trousers, and at the moment he bent with a carpenter's saw over something in his lap. The saw scraped fretfully, monotonously, and she stopped beside him and stood scratching her knee. Presently, he raised his head. Hello, he remarked without enthusiasm. Go to the library and get me a cigarette. I've got one on me somewhere. She searched the pockets of her linen dress, but without success. Where? She said. She mused a moment, spreading her pocket with her hand and staring into it. Then she said, Oh, yes, and took off her hat. From the crown of it she produced one limp cigarette. I ought to have another, she mused aloud, searching the hat again. I guess that's all, though. You can have it. I don't want one anyway. She extended the cigarette and scurled her hat onto the lounge beside. Look out, he said quickly. Don't put it there. I need all this space. Put it somewhere else, can't you? He pushed the hat off the divan onto the floor and accepted the cigarette. The tobacco was partially shredded from it and it was limp, like a worm. What you been doing to it? How long have you had it, anyway? She sat beside him and raked a match across his thigh. How's it coming, Josh? She asked, extending her hand toward the object on his lap. It was a cylinder of wood larger than a silver dollar and about 3 inches long. He fended her off with the hand that held the lighted match, thrusting the elbow beneath her chin. Let it alone, I tell you. Oh, all right. Keep your shirt on. She moved swiftly away, and he took up the saw again, putting the burning cigarette on the wicker lounge between them. A thin pencil of smoke rose from it in the windless air, and soon a faint smell of burning. She picked up the cigarette, drew once at it, and replaced it so it would not scorch the wicker. The saw grated jerkily and thinly outside, beyond the vines. Insects scraped monotonously one to another in the heavy, swooning darkness. A moth, having evaded the screen wire, gyrated idiotically beneath and about the light. She raised her skirt to stare at a small, feverish spot on her brown knee. The saw grated jerkily, ceased, and he laid it aside again. The cylinder was in 2 sections, fitted one to another, and she drew one foot beneath the other knee, bending nearer to watch him, breathing against his neck. He moved restively, and she said at last, Say, Gus, how long will it take you to get it finished? He raised his face, suspending his knife blade. They were twins. Just as there was something masculine about her jaw, so was there something feminine about his. "For God's sake," he exclaimed. "Let me alone, can't you? Go away and pull your clothes down. Don't you ever get tired of waving your legs around?" A yellow Negro in a starched jacket stepped silently around the corner. When they looked up, he turned without speaking. "All right, Walter," she said, but he was gone. They followed, leaving the cigarette to lift its unwavering plume and a thin smell of burning wicker into the somnolent air. End of Section 8. Read by Chris Buchanan, Springfield, Illinois, June 15th, 2023. Section 9 of Mosquitos by William Faulkner. Prologue. Section 9. Fool, fool, you have work to do. O cursed of God, cursed and forgotten form, shapes cunningly sweated, cunning to simplicity, shapes out of chaos made more satisfactory than bread to the belly, formed by a madman, dreamed gat on the body of chaos, le garçon verge, of the soul horned by utility. O cuckold of derision, the warehouse, the dock, was a formal rectangle without perspective. Flat as cardboard, and projecting at a faint motionless angle above it, against a lighter spaciousness in a sky not quite so imminent and weary. Masts of a freighter lying against the dock. Form and utility, Gordon repeated to himself. Or form and chance. Or chance and utility. Beneath it, within the somber gloom of the warehouse where men had sweated and labored, across the empty floor lately thunderous with trucks, amid the rich, overripe odors of the ends of the earth, coffee and resin and tow and fruit, he walked, surrounded by ghosts passing on. The hull of the freighter bulked, forecastle and poop soaring darkly sharp, solid, cutting off vision, soaring its superstructure on the sky. The unseen river continued a ceaseless sound against the hull, lulling it with a simulation of the sea, and about the piles of the wharf. The shore and the river curved away like the bodies of two dark sleepers embracing, curved one to the other in slumber, and far away opposite the point, banked lights flickered like a pile of yet living ashes in the wind. Gordon paused, leaning over the edge of the wharf, staring down into the water. Stars in my hair and beard, I am crowned with stars. Christ by his own hand, an autogethsemane, carved darkly out of pure space, but not rigid, no, an unmuscled wallowing, fecund and foul, the placid, tragic body of a woman who conceives without pleasure, bears without pain. What would I say to her, fool? Fool, you have work to do. You have nothing. Accursed, intolerant, and unclean to warm your damn bones. Then whiskey will do as well. Or a chisel and a maul. Any damn squirrel keeps warm in a cage. Go on then. Israfel revolted, surprised behind a haycock by a male relation. Fortitude became a match flame snuffed by a small white belly. Where was it I once saw a dogwood tree? Not white, but tan as cream. What will you say to her? Bitter and new as a sunburned flame. Bitter and new those two little silken snails somewhere under her dress, horned pinkly yet reluctant, O Israfel. I wax your wings with the thin, odorless moisture of her thighs. Strangle your heart with her hair, fool. Fool. Cursed and forgotten of God. He flung back his head and laughed, a huge laugh in the loneliness. His voice surged like a dark billow against the wall behind him. Then ebbing outward over the dim, formless river, it died slowly away. Then, from the other shore, a mirthless echo mocked him, and it too died away. He went on treading the dark, resin-scented wharf. Presently, he came to a break in the black, depthless monotony of the wall, and the wall again assumed a pure and inevitable formal significance, sharp against the glow of the city. He turned his back to the river and soon was among the freight cars, black and angular, looming. And down the tracks, much further away than it appeared, an engine glared and panted while filaments of steel, radiating from it toward and about his feet, were like incandescent veins in a dark leaf. There was a moon, low in the sky and worn, thumbed partly away like an old coin, and he went on. Above, banana and palm and cathedral spires soared without perspective on the hot sky. Looking through the tall pickets into Jackson Square was like looking into an aquarium. A moist and motionless absinthe cloudy green of all shades from ink black to a thin and rigid feathering of silver on pomegranate and mimosa. Like coral in a tideless sea, amid which globular lights hung dull and unstaying as jellyfish, incandescent yet without seeming to emanate light. And in the center of it, Andrew's Baroque plunging stasis nimbused about with thin gleams as though he, too, were recently wedded. He crossed the street into shadow, following the wall. Two figures stood indistinguishably at his door. "Pardon me," he said, touching the nearer man peremptorily. And as he did, so the other man turned. "Why, here he is now," this one said. "Hello, Gordon. Julius and I were looking for you." "Yes," Gordon loomed above the two shorter men, staring down at them, remote and arrogant. Fairchild removed his hat, mopping his face. Then he flipped his handkerchief viciously about his head. "I don't mind the heat," he explained fretfully. "I like it, in fact. Like an old racehorse, you know. He's willing enough, you know, but in the cold weather, when his muscles are stiff and his bones ache, the young ones all show him up. But about 4th of July, when the sun gets hot and his muscles loosen up and his old bones don't complain anymore, then he's good as any of them." "Yes?" repeated Gordon, looking above them into shadow. The Semitic man removed his cigar. "It will be better on the water tomorrow," he said. Gordon brooded above them. Then he remembered himself. "Come on," he directed abruptly, elbowing the Semitic man aside and extending his latchkey. No, Fairchild demurred quickly. "We won't stop. Julius just reminded me. We came to see if you'd change your mind and come with us on Miss Maurier's boat tomorrow. We saw "I have," Gordon interrupted him. "I'm coming." "That's good," Fairchild agreed heartedly. "You probably won't regret it much." "He may enjoy it, Julius," he added. "Besides, you'll be wise to go on and get it over with. Then she'll let you alone. After all, you can't afford to ignore people that own food and automobiles, you know." "Can he, Julius?" The Semitic man agreed. "When he clutters himself up with people, which he can't avoid doing, by all means let it be with people who own food and whiskey and motor cars. The less intelligent, the better." He struck a match to his cigar. "But he won't last very long with her anyways. He'll last even a shorter time than you did," he told Fairchild. "Yes, I guess you're right, but he ought to keep a line on her anyhow. If you can neither ride nor drive the beast yourself, it's a good idea to keep it in a pasture nearby. You may someday be able to swap it for something, you know. A Ford, for instance, or a radio," the Semitic man suggested. "But you've got your simile backward." "Backward?" repeated the other. "You were speaking from the point of view of the rider," he explained. "Oh," Fairchild remarked. He emitted a disparaging sound. "Ford is good," he said heavily. "I think radio is pretty good myself," the other said complacently. "Oh, dry up," Fairchild replaced his hat. "So you are coming with us then?" he said to Gordon. "Yes, I'm coming. But won't you come up?" No, not tonight. I know your place, you see." Gordon made no reply, brooding his tall head in the shadow. "Well, I'll phone her and have her send a car for you tomorrow," Fairchild added. "Come on, Julius, let's go." "Glad you changed your mind," he added belatedly. "Good night. Come on, Julius." They crossed the street and entered the square. Once within the gates, they were assailed, waylaid from behind, every blade and leaf with a silent, vicious delight. "Good Lord," exclaimed Fairchild, flipping his handkerchief madly about. "Let's get over to the docks. Maybe there ain't any nautical ones." He hurried on, the Semitic man ambling beside him, clamping his dead cigar. "He's a funny chap," the Semitic man remarked. They waited for a trolley to pass, then crossed the street. The wharf, the warehouse, was a formal rectangle with two slender masts projecting above it at a faint angle. They went on between two dark buildings and halted again while a switch engine drew an interminable monotony of cars up the track. "He ought to get out of himself more," Fairchild commented. "You can't be an artist all the time. You'll go crazy." "You couldn't," the other corrected. "But then, you are not an artist. There is somewhere within you a bewildered stenographer with a gift for people, but outwardly, you might be anything. You're an artist only when you are telling about people, while Gordon is not an artist only when he is cutting at a piece of wood or stone. And it's very difficult for a man like that to establish workable relations with people. Other artists are too busy playing with their own egos. Workaday people will not or cannot bother with him. So his alternatives are misanthropy or an endless gabbling of aesthetic foster sisters of both sexes, particularly if his lot is cast outside of New York City. There you go, disparaging our Latin Quarter again. Where's your civic pride? Where's your common courtesy even? Even the dog won't bite the hand that holds the bread. Corn belt, the other said shortly. Indiana talking. You people up there are born with the booster complex, aren't you? Or do you acquire it with sunburned necks? Oh, well, we Nordics are at a disadvantage, Fairchild replied. His tone was unctuous. The other detected something falsely frank in it. We've got to fix our idea on a terrestrial place. Though we know it's second rate, that's the best we can do. But you people have got all heaven for your old hometown, you know. I could forgive everything except the unpardonable clumsiness of that, the other told him. Your idea is not bad. Why don't you give it to Mark Frost? Roughly, you know. And let him untangle it for you. You and he could both use it then. If you are quick enough, that is. Fairchild laughed. Now you lay me off our New Orleans bohemian life? Stay away from us if you don't like it. I like it myself. There is a kind of charming futility about it, like a country club where they play croquet instead of golf, the other supplied for him. Well, yes, Fairchild agreed. Something like that. The warehouse loomed above them, and they passed into it and amid the ghosts of the ends of the earth. A croquet player may not be much of a go-getter, but what do you think of a man who just sits around and criticizes croquet? Well, I'm like the rest of you immortals. I've got to pass the time some way in order to gain some idea of how to pass eternity, the Semitic man answered. They passed through the warehouse and onto the dock. It was cooler here, quieter. 2 ferry boats passed and repassed like a pair of golden swans in a barren cycle of courtship. The shore and the river curved away in the dark embracing slumber to where a bank of tiny lights flickered and trembled, bodiless and far away. It was much cooler here, and they removed their hats. The Semitic man unclamped his dead cigar and cast it outward. Silence, water, night absorbed it without a sound. End of Section 9. Read by Chris Buchanan, Springfield, Illinois, June 9th, 2023. Section 10 of Mosquitos by William Faulkner. The first day. 10 o'clock. The Nausicaa lay in the basin, a nice thing with her white, matronly hull and mahogany and brass superstructure, and the yacht club flag at the peak. A firm, steady wind blew in from the lake, and Mrs. Maurier, having already got a taste of the sea from it, had donned her yachting cap, and she now clashed and jangled in a happy, pointless ecstasy. Her 2 cars had made several trips and would make several more, creeping and jouncing along the inferior macadam road, upon and beside which the spore of Coca-Cola and the almond bar betrayed the lair of the hot dog and the less than 1%. All the jollity of departure under a perfect day, heat-ridden city behind, and a breeze too steady for the darn things to light on you. Her guests, each with his or her jar of almond cream and sunburn lotion, came aboard in bright, babbling surges, calling, "Ship ahoy, everyone!" and other suitable nautical cries, while various casuals gathered along the quay looked on with morose interest. Mrs. Maurier, in her yachting cap, plashed and jangled in a happy and senseless excitement. On the upper deck, where the steward broke out chairs for them, her guests in their colored clothing gathered, dressed for deep water in batik and flowing ties and open collars, informal and colorful with the exception of Mark Frost, the ghostly young man, a poet who produced an occasional cerebral and obscure poem in 4 or 7 lines, reminding one somehow of the function of evacuation, excruciatingly and incompletely performed. He wore ironed serge and a high starched collar, and he borrowed a cigarette of the steward and lay immediately at full length on something, as was his way. Mrs. Wiseman and Miss Jameson, flanking Mr. Taliaferro, sat with cigarettes also. Fairchild, accompanied by Gordon, the Semitic man, and a florid stranger in heavy tweeds, and carrying among them several weighty-looking suitcases, had gone directly below. "Are we all here? Are we all here?" Mrs. Maurier chanted beneath her yachting cap, roving her eyes among her guests. Her niece stood at the after rail beside a soft blonde girl in a slightly soiled green dress. They both gazed shoreward, where at the end of the gangplank a flashy youth lounged in a sort of skulking belligerence, smoking cigarettes. The niece said without turning her head, "What's the matter with him? Why doesn't he come aboard?" The youth's attention seemed to be anywhere else save on the boat, yet he was so obviously there in the eye, belligerent and skulking. The niece said, "Hey." Then she said, "What's his name? You better tell him to come on, hadn't you?" The blonde girl hissed, Pete, in a repressed tone. The youth moved his slanted, stiff straw hat an inch, and the blonde girl beckoned to him. He slanted the hat to the back of his head. His whole attitude gave the impression that he was some distance away. "Ain't you coming with us?" the blonde girl asked in that surreptitious tone. "What you say?" he replied loudly so that everybody looked at him. Even the reclining poet raised his head. "Come on board, Pete," the niece called. "Be yourself." The youth took another cigarette from his pack. He buttoned his narrow coat. "Well, I guess I will," he agreed in his carrying tone. Mrs. Maurier held her expression of infantile astonishment up to him as he crossed the gangplank. He evaded her politely, climbing the rail with that fluid agility of the young. "Are you the new steward?" she asked doubtfully, blinking at him. "Sure, lady," he agreed courteously, putting his cigarette in his mouth. The other guests stared at him from their deck chairs, and slanting his hat forward, he ran the gauntlet of their eyes, passing aft to join the two girls. Mrs. Maurier gazed after his high-vented coat in astonishment. Then she remarked the blonde girl beside her niece. She blinked again. "Why," she began. Then she said, "Patricia, who—" "Oh, yes," the niece said. "This is—" She turned to the blonde girl. "What's your name, Jenny? I forgot." "Geneviève Steinbauer," the blonde girl submitted. "Miss Steinbauer, and this one is Pete something. I met them downtown. They want to go too." Mrs. Maurier transferred her astonishment from Jenny's vague, ripe prettiness to Pete's bold, uncomfortable face. "Why, he's the new steward, isn't he?" "I don't know." The niece looked at Jenny again. "Is he?" she asked. Jenny didn't know either. Pete himself was uncomfortably noncommittal. "I don't know," he answered. "You told me to come," he accused the niece. "She means," the niece explained, "did you come to work on the boat?" "Not me," Pete answered quickly. "I ain't a sailor. She expects me to run this ferry for her. Me and Jenny are going back to town." "You don't have to run it. She's got regular men for that." "There's your steward anyway, Aunt Pat," the niece said. "Pete just wanted to come with Jenny, that's all." Mrs. Maurier looked. Yes, there was the steward, descending the companionway with a load of luggage. She looked again at Pete and Jenny, but at that moment voices came aft, breaking her amazement. The captain wished to know if he should cast off. A message was relayed by all present. "Are we all here?" Mrs. Maurier chanted anew, forgetting Jenny and Pete. "Mr. Fairchild, where's he?" She roved her round, frantic face, trying to count noses. "Where is Mr. Fairchild?" she repeated in panic. Her car was backing and filling to turn round, and she ran to the rail and screamed to the driver. He stopped the car, completely blocking the road, and hung his head out with resignation. Mrs. Wiseman said, "He's here. He came with Ernest, didn't he?" Mr. Taliaferro corroborated her, and Mrs. Maurier roved her frantic gaze anew, trying to count them. A sailor sprang ashore and cast off head and stern lines under the morose regard of the casuals. The helmsman thrust his head from the wheelhouse, and he and the deckhand bawled at each other. The sailors sprang aboard, and the Nausicaa moved slightly in the water like a soundless awakening sigh. The steward drew in the gangplank, and the engine-room telegraph rang remotely. The Nausicaa waked further, quivering a little, and as a gap of water grew between quay and boat without any sensation of motion whatever, Mrs. Maurier's second car came jouncing into view, honking madly, and the niece, sitting flat on the deck and stripping off her stockings, said, "Here comes Josh." Mrs. Maurier shrieked. The car stopped and her nephew descended without haste. The steward, coiling the stern line down, gathered it up and flung it outward across the growing gap of water. The telegraph rang again, and the Nausicaa sighed and went back to sleep, rocking sedately. "Shake it up, Josh," his sister called. Mrs. Maurier shrieked again, and two of the loungers caught the line and dug their heels as the nephew, coatless and hatless, approached without haste and climbed aboard, carrying a new carpenter's saw. "I had to go downtown and buy one," he explained casually. "Walter wouldn't let me bring yours." End of section 10. Read by Sandra. Section 11 of Mosquitos. The first day, 11 o'clock. At last, Mrs. Maurier succeeded in cornering her niece. New Orleans, the Basin, the yacht club were far behind. The Nausicaa sped youthfully and gaily under a blue and drowsy day. Beneath her forefoot a small bow wave spread its sedate, fading fan. Mrs. Maurier's people could not escape her now. They had settled themselves comfortably on deck. There was nothing to look at save one another, nothing to do save wait for lunch. All that is, except Jenny and Pete. Pete, holding his hat on, stood yet at the after rail, with Jenny beside him. Her air was that of a soft and futile cajolery, to which Pete was smouldering and impervious. Mrs. Maurier breathed a sigh of temporary relief and astonishment, and ran her niece to earth in the after companionway. "Patricia," she demanded, "what on earth did you invite these two young people for?" "God knows," the niece answered, looking past her aunt's yachting cap to Pete, belligerent and uncomfortable beside Jenny's bovine white placidity. "God knows. If you want to turn round and take 'em back, don't let me stand in your way." "But why did you ask them?" "Well, I couldn't tell that they were going to turn out to be so wet, could I? And you said yourself there were not enough women coming. You said so yourself last night." "Yes, but why ask those two? Who are they? Where did you ever meet such people? I met Jenny downtown. I know, but where did you come to know her? How long have you known her? I met her downtown this morning, I tell you, in Holmes's while I was buying a bathing suit. She said she'd like to come, but the other one was waiting outside on the street for her and he put his foot down. He said she shouldn't go without him. He's her heavy, I gather." Mrs. Marty's astonishment was sincere now. "Do you mean to tell me," she asked in shocked unbelief, "that you never saw these people before? That you invited two people you never saw before to come on a party on my boat?" "I just asked Jenny," the niece explained patiently. "The other one had to come so she could come. I didn't want him specially. How could I know her when I never saw her before? If I'd known her, you can bet I wouldn't have asked her to come. She's a complete washout as far as I'm concerned. But I couldn't see that this morning. I thought she was all right then. Gabriel's pants, look at them." They both looked back at Jenny with her flimsy green dress, at Pete holding his hat on. "Well, I got him here. I guess I'll have to keep him from getting stepped on. I think I'll get Pete a piece of string to tie his hat down with anyway." She swung herself easily up the stairs. Mrs. Maurier saw with horrified surprise that she wore neither shoes nor stockings. "Patricia!" she shrieked. The niece paused, looking over her shoulder. Her aunt pointed mutely at her bare legs. "Haul in your sheet, Aunt Pat," the niece replied briskly. "You're jibbing." End of section 11. Read by Sandra. Section 12 of Mosquitos. The first day, 1 o'clock. Lunch was spread on deck, on collapsible card tables set end to end. When she appeared, her guests all regarded her brightly. A trifle curiously, Mrs. Maurier, oblivious, herded them toward it. "Sit anywhere, people," she repeated in sing-song. "Pearls will be at a premium this voyage. To the winner belongs the fair lady, remember?" This sounded a little strange to her, so she repeated, "Sit anywhere, people. The gentleman must make—" She looked about upon her guests, and her voice died away. Her party consisted of Mrs. Wiseman, Miss Jameson, herself, Jenny and Pete clotting unhappily behind her niece, Mr. Taliaferro and her nephew, who had already seated himself. "Where are the gentlemen?" she asked at large. "Jumped overboard," muttered Pete darkly, unheard, clutching his hat. The others stood watching her brightly. "Where are the gentlemen?" Mrs. Maurier repeated. "If you'd stop talking a minute, you wouldn't have to ask," her nephew told her. He had already seated himself, and he now spooned into a grapefruit with preoccupied celerity. "Theodore!" his aunt exclaimed. From below there came an indistinguishable mixture of sounds, somehow vaguely convivial. "Whooping it up," the nephew added, looking up at his aunt at her expression of reproof. "In a hurry," he explained. "Got to get done. Can't wait on those birds." He remarked his sister's guests for the first time. "Who are your friends, Gus?" he asked without interest. Then he fell anew upon his grapefruit. "Theodore!" his aunt exclaimed again. The indistinguishable convivial sound welled, becoming laughter. Mrs. Maurier roved her astonished eyes. "What can they be doing?" Mr. Taliaferro moved deferentially, tactfully. "If you wish—" "Oh, Mr. Taliaferro, if you would be so kind," Mrs. Maurier accepted with emotion. "Let the steward go, Aunt Pat. Let's eat. the niece said, thrusting Jenny forward. "Come on, Pete, give me your hat," she added, offering to take it. Pete refused to surrender it. "Wait," the nephew interjected. "I'll get him up." He picked up the thick plate and, flipping his grapefruit hull overboard, he turned sideways in his chair and hammered a brisk staccato on the deck with the dish. "Theodore," his aunt exclaimed for the third time. "Mr. Taliaferro, will you—" Mr. Taliaferro sped toward the companionway, vanished. "Ah, let the steward go, Aunt Pat," the niece repeated. "Come on, let's sit down. Let up, Josh, for God's sake." "Yes, Mrs. Morier, don't wait for them," Mrs. Wiseman abetted, seating herself also. The others followed suit. Mrs. Morier roved her fretted eyes. "Well," she submitted at last. Then she remarked Pete, still clutching his hat. "I'll take your hat," she offered, extending her hand. Pete foiled her quickly. "Look out," he said. "I've got it." He moved beyond Jenny and put his hat behind him in his chair. At this moment, the gentleman appeared from below, talking loudly. "Ah, wretches," began the hostess with flaccid coquetry, shaking her finger at them. Fairchild was in the lead, burly and jovial, a shade unsteady as to gait. Mr. Taliaferro brought up the rear. He too had now a temporarily emancipated air. "I guess you thought we'd jump the ship," Fairchild suggested, happily apologetic. Mrs. Morier sought Mr. Taliaferro's evasive eyes. "We were helping Major Ayres find his teeth," Fairchild added. "Lost 'em in that little rabbit hutch where we were," explained the florid man. "Couldn't find 'em right off. No teeth, no tiffin, you know." "If you don't mind," he murmured politely, sitting himself next Mrs. Wiseman. "Ah, grapefruit." He raised his voice again. "How jolly. Seen no grapefruit since we left New Orleans, eh, Julius?" "Lost his teeth?" repeated Mrs. Morier, dazed. The niece and her brother regarded the florid man with interest. "They fell out of his mouth," Fairchild elaborated, taking the seat next Miss Jameson. "He was laughing at something Julius said, and they fell out of his mouth, and somebody kicked him under the bunk, you see." "What was it you said, Julius?" Mr. Taliaferro essayed to seat himself beside the florid man. Mrs. Morier again sought his eye, forced him and vanquished him with bright command. He rose and went to the chair next to her, and she leaned toward him, sniffing. "Ah, Mr. Taliaferro," she murmured with playful implacability. "Naughty, naughty." "Just a nip. They were rather insistent," Mr. Taliaferro apologized. "You men, you naughty men. I'll forgive you, however, this once," she answered. "Do ring, please." The Semitic man's flaccid face and dark, compassionate eyes presided at the head of the table. Gordon stood for a time after the others were seated. Then he came and took the seat between Mrs. Morier and her niece, with abrupt arrogance. The niece looked up briefly. "Hello, Blackbeard." Mrs. Morier smiled at him automatically. She said, "Listen, people. Mr. Taliaferro is going to make an announcement about promptness," she added to Mr. Taliaferro, putting her hand on his sleeve. "Ah, yes. I say, you chaps almost missed lunch. We were not going to wait on you. The lunch hour is 12:30 hereafter, and everyone must be present promptly. Ship's discipline, you know. Eh, Commodore?" The hostess corroborated. "You must be good children," she added with a playful relief, looking about her table. Her worried expression returned. "Why, there's an empty place. Who isn't here?" She roved her eyes in growing alarm. "Someone isn't here," she repeated. She had a brief and dreadful vision of having to put back short one guest, of inquest and reporters and headlines, and of floating inert buttocks in some lonely reach of the lake that would later wash ashore with that mute, inopportune implacability of the drowned. The guests stared at one another, then at the vacant place, then at one another again. Mrs. Morier tried to call a mental roll, staring at each in turn. Presently Miss Jameson said, "Why, it's Mark, isn't it?" It was Mark. They'd forgotten him. Mrs. Morier dispatched the steward, who found the ghostly poet still at full length on the upper deck. He appeared in his ironed serge, bathing them briefly in his pale gaze. "You gave us rather a turn, my dear fellow," Mr. Taliaferro informed him with reproof, taking upon himself the duties of host. "I wondered how long it would be before someone saw fit to notify me that lunch was ready," the poet replied with cold dignity, taking his seat. Fairchild, watching him, said abruptly, "Say, Julius, Mark's the very man for Major Ayres, Andy. Say, Major, here's a man to take your first bottle. Tell him about your scheme." The florid man regarded the poet affably. Yes. It's a salts, you see. You spoon a bit of it into your—" "A what?" asked the poet, poising his spoon and staring at the florid man. The others all poised their tools and stared at the florid man. "A salts," he explained, "like our salts at home, you know." Repeated Mrs. Morier. Mr. Taliaferro's eyes popped mildly. "All Americans are constipated," the florid man continued blithely. "Do with a bit of salts in a tumbler of water in the morning. Now, my scheme is—" "Mr. Taliaferro," Mrs. Morier implored. Mr. Taliaferro girded himself anew. "My dear sir," he began, "is to put up the salts in a tweaky file, a file that will look well on one's night table, a jolly design of some sort. All Americans will buy it. Now, the population of your country is several millions, I fancy, and when you take into consideration the fact that all Americans are "My dear sir," said Mr. Taliaferro, louder. "Eh?" said the florid man, looking at him. "What kind of a jar will you put him in?" asked the nephew, his mind taking fire. "Some tweaky sort of thing that all Americans will buy." "The American flag and a couple of doves holding dollar marks in their bills, and a handle that when you pull it out it's a corkscrew," suggested Fairchild. The florid man glared at him with interest and calculation. "Or," the Semitic man suggested, "a small condensed table for calculating interest on one side and a good recipe for beer on the other." The florid man glared at him with interest. "That's just for men," Mrs. Wiseman said. "How about the women's trade?" "A bit of mirror would do for them, don't you think?" the florid man offered. "Surrounded by a design in colors, eh?" Mrs. Wiseman gave him a murderous glance, and the poet added, "And a formula for preventing conception and a secret place for hairpins." The hostess moaned. "Mr. Taliaferro," Mrs. Wiseman said savagely, "I have a better idea than that for both sexes. Your photograph on one side and the golden rule on the other." The florid man glared at her with interest. The nephew broke in once more. "I mean, have you invented a jar yet? Invented a way to get the stuff out of the jar?" "Oh, yes, I've done that. You spoon it out, you know." "But tell him how you know all Americans are constipated," Fairchild suggested. Mrs. Morier rang the service bell furiously and at length. The steward appeared, and as he removed the plates and replaced them with others, the florid man leaned nearer Mrs. Wiseman. "What's that chap?" he asked, indicating Mr. Taliaferro. "What is he?" Mrs. Wiseman repeated. "Why, I think he sells things downtown, doesn't he, Julius?" She appealed to her brother. "I mean, what, race does he belong to?" "Oh, you noticed his accent then?" "Yes, I noticed he doesn't talk like Americans. I thought perhaps he is one of your natives." "One of our?" She stared at him. "You're Red Indians, you know," he explained. Mrs. Morier rang her little bell again, sort of chattering to herself. Into Section 12, read by Sandra. Section 13 of Mosquitos, by William Faulkner. First day, 2:00. Mrs. Morier put an end to that luncheon as soon as she decently could. "If I can only break them up and get them into a bridge game," she thought in agony. It had got to where every time one of the gentlemen made the precursory sound of speech, Mrs. Morier flinched and cringed nearer Mr. Taliaferro. At least she could depend on him, provided. But she was going to do the providing in his case. They had discussed Major Ayres' salts throughout the meal. Eva Wiseman had turned renegade and abetted them, despite the atmosphere of reproof Mrs. Morier had tried to foster and support. And on top of all this, the strange young man had the queerest manner of using knife and fork. Mr. Fairchild's way was, well, uncouth. But after all, one must pay a price for art. Jenny, on the other hand, had an undeniable style, feeding herself with her little finger at a rigid and elegant angle from her hand. And now, Fairchild was saying, "Now, here's a clean case of poetic justice for you. 100-odd years ago, Major Ayres' grandpa wants to come to New Orleans, but our grandfathers stop him down yonder in those Chalmette swamps and lick hell out of him. And now Major Ayres comes into the city itself and conquers it with a laxative so mild that, as he says, you don't even notice it. Hey, Julius? It also confounds all the old convictions regarding the irreconcilability of science and art, the Semitic man suggested. Huh? Said Fairchild. Oh, sure, that's right. Say, he certainly ought to make Al Jackson a present of a bottle, oughtn't he? The thin poet groaned sepulchrally. Major Ayres repeated, Al Jackson? The steward removed the cloth. The table was formed of a number of card tables. By Mrs. Moyer's direction, he did not remove these. She called him to her, whispered to him. He went below. Why, didn't you ever hear of Al Jackson? Asked Fairchild in unctuous surprise. He's a funny man, a direct descendant of old Hickory that lipped you folks in 1812, he claims. He's quite a character in New Orleans. The other guests all listened to Fairchild with a sort of non-committal attention. You can always tell him because he wears Congress boots all the time. Congress boots? Murmured Major Ayres, staring at him. Fairchild explained, raising his foot above the level of the table to demonstrate. Sure, on the street, at formal gatherings, even in evening dress he wears them. He even wears them in bathing. In bathing? I say. Major Ayres stared at the narrator with his round china blue eyes. Sure, won't let anyone see him barefoot. A family deformity, you see. Old Hickory himself had it. That's the reason he outfought the British in those swamps. He'd never have whipped him otherwise. When you get to town, go down to Jackson Square and look at that statue of the old fellow. He's got on Congress boots. He turned to the Semitic man. By the way, Julius, you remember about old Hickory's cavalry, don't you? The Semitic man was non-committal, and Fairchild continued. Well, the old general bought a place in Florida. A stock farm, they told him it was, and he gathered up a bunch of mountaineers from his Tennessee place and sent them down there with a herd of horses. Well, sir, when they got there, they found the place was pretty near all swamp. But they were hardy folks, so they lit right in to make the best of it. In the meantime— Doing what? Asked the nephew. Huh? Said Fairchild. What were they going to do in Florida? That's what we all want to know, Mrs. Wiseman said. Sell real estate to the Indians, the Semitic man suggested. Major Ayres stared at him with his little blue eyes. No, they were going to run a dude ranch for the big hotels at Palm Beach, Fairchild told them. And in the meantime, some of these horses strayed off into the swamps, and in some way the breed got crossed with alligators. And so, when old Hickory found he was going to have to fight his battle down there in those Chalmette swamps, he sent over to his Florida place and had him round up as many of those half-horsed, half-alligators as they could. And he mounted some of his infantry on them, and the British couldn't stop him at all. The British don't know Florida. That's true, the Semitic man put in. There were no excursions then, and they didn't even know what the things were, you see. Major Ayres and Mrs. Maury stared at Fairchild in quiet, childlike astonishment. Go on, said Major Ayres at last. You're pulling my leg. No, asked Julius. But then it is kind of hard for a foreigner to get us. We're simple people, we Americans, kind of childlike and hearty, and you've got to be both to cross a horse on an alligator and then find some use for 'em, you know. That's part of our national temperament, Major. You'll understand it better when you've been among us longer. Won't he, Julius? Yes, he'll be able to get us all right when he's been in America long enough to acquire our customs. It's the custom that makes the man, you know. Ah, yes, said Major Ayres, blinking at him. But there's one of your customs I'll not be able to acquire. Your habit of eating apple tarts. We don't have apple tarts at home, you know. No Englishman, nor Welshman, nor Scot will eat an apple tart. You don't, repeated Fairchild. Why, I seem to remember. But not apple tarts, old lad. We have other sorts, but no apple tarts. You see, years ago it was the custom at Eton for the young lads to pop out at all hours and buy apple tarts. And one day, a cabinet member's son, died of a surfeit of apple tarts, whereupon his father had Parliament put through a bill that no minor should be able to purchase an apple tart in the British dominions. So this generation grew up without 'em. The former generation died off, and now the present generation never heard of apple tarts. He turned to the Semitic man. Custom, as you just remarked. The ghostly poet, waiting his chance, murmured, Secretary of the Interior. But this was ignored. Mrs. Mortier stared at Major Ayres and Fairchild, and the others all stared at Major Ayres' florid, bland face, and there was an interval of silence, during which the hostess glanced about hopelessly among her guests. The steward reappeared, and she hailed him with utter relief, ringing her little bell again commandingly. The others looked toward her, and she passed her gaze from face to face. "Now, people, at 4 o'clock we will be in good bathing water. Until then, what do you say to a nice game of bridge? Of course, those who really must have a siesta will be excused, but I'm sure no one will wish to remain below on such a day as this," she added brightly. "Let me see. Mr. Fairchild, Mrs. Wiseman, Patricia, and Julius will be table number 1. Major Ayres, Miss Jameson, Mr. Taliaferro." Her gaze came to rest on Jenny. "Do you play bridge, Miss Child?" Fairchild had risen with some trepidation. "Say, Julius, Major Ayres had better lie down a while, don't you think? Being new to our hot climate, you know. And Gordon, too. Hey, Gordon, don't you reckon we better lie down a while?" "Right you are," Major Ayres agreed with alacrity, rising also. "If the ladies will excuse us, that is. Might get a touch of sun, you know," he added, glancing briefly at the awning overhead. "But really," said Mrs. Mortier helplessly. The gentleman, clotting, moved toward the companionway. "Coming, Gordon?" Fairchild called. Mrs. Mortier turned to Gordon. "Surely, Mr. Gordon, you'll not desert us?" Gordon looked at the niece. She met his harsh, arrogant stare calmly, and he turned away. "Yes, don't play cards," he answered shortly. "But really," repeated Mrs. Mortier. Mr. Taliaferro and Pete remained. The nephew had already taken himself off to his new carpenter's saw. Mrs. Mortier looked at Pete, then she looked away. Not even necessary to ask Pete if he played bridge. "You won't play at all?" she called after the departing gentleman hopelessly. "Sure, we'll come back later," Fairchild assured her, herding his watch below. They descended noisily. Mrs. Mortier looked about on her depleted party with astonished despair. Bernice gazed at the emptied companionway a moment. Then she looked about at the remainder of the party grouped about the superfluous card tables. "And you said you didn't have enough women to go round," she remarked. "But we can have one table anyway." Mrs. Mortier brightened suddenly. "There's Eva, Dorothy, Mr. Taliaferro, and me. Why, here's Mark," she exclaimed. They had forgotten him again. "Mark, of course. I'll cut out this hand." Mr. Taliaferro demurred. "By no means. I'll cut out. You take the hand, I insist." Mrs. Mortier refused. Mr. Taliaferro became insistent, and she examined him with cold speculation. Mr. Taliaferro at last averted his eyes, and Mrs. Mortier glanced briefly toward the companionway. She was firm. "Poor Taliaferro," the Semitic man said. Fairchild led the way along the passage, pausing at his door while his gang trod his heels. "Did you see his face? She'll keep him under her thumb from now on." "I don't feel sorry for him," Fairchild said. "I think he kind of likes it. He's always a little uncomfortable with men, you know. Being among a bunch of women seems to restore his confidence in himself, gives him a sense of superiority, which his contacts with men seem to have pretty well hammered out of him. I guess the world does seem a kind of crude place to a man that spends 8 hours a day surrounded by lace-trimmed crêpe de Jean," he added, fumbling at the door. "Besides, he can't come to me for advice about how to seduce somebody. He's a fairly intelligent man, more sensitive than most, and yet he too labors under the illusion that art is just a valid camouflage for ratting." He opened the door at last, and they entered, and sat variously while he knelt and dragged from beneath the bunk a heavy suitcase. "She's quite wealthy, isn't she?" Major Ayres asked from the bunk. The Semitic man, as was his way, had already preempted the single chair. Gordon leaned his back against the wall, tall and shabby and arrogant. "Rotten with it," Fairchild answered. He got a bottle from the suitcase and rose to his feet and held the bottle against the light, gloating. "She owns plantations or something, don't you, Julius? First family or something like that?" "Something like that," the Semitic man agreed. "She's a northerner herself. Married it. I think that explains her myself." "Explains her?" Fairchild repeated, passing glasses among them. "It's a long story. I'll tell it to you some day." "It'll take a long story to explain her," Fairchild rejoined. "Say, she'd be a better bet for Major Ayres in the laxative business, wouldn't she?" I'd rather own plantations than a patent medicine plant any day. He'd have to remove Taliaferro somehow, the Semitic man remarked. Taliaferro's not thinking seriously of her, is he? He better be, the other answered. I wouldn't say he's got intentions on her exactly, he corrected. He's just there without knowing it. A natural hazard as regards anyone else's prospects. Freedom and the laxative business. Or plantations and Mrs. Maurier. Fairchild mused aloud. Well, I don't know. What do you think, Gordon? Gordon stood against the wall, aloof, not listening to them hardly, watching within the bitter and arrogant loneliness of his heart, a shape strange and new as fire, swirling, headless, armless, legless. But when his name was spoken, he stirred. Let's have a drink, he said. Fairchild filled the glasses. The muscles at the bases of their noses tightened. That's a pretty good rejoinder to every emergency life may offer, like Squire Western's hullo, the Semitic man said. Yes, but freedom, began Fairchild. Drink your whiskey, the other told him. Take what little freedom you'll ever get while you can. Freedom from police is the greatest freedom man can demand or expect. Freedom, said Major Ayres. The only freedom is in wartime. Everyone too busy fighting or getting ribbons or a snug berth to annoy you. Samurai or headhunters, take your choice. Mud and glory or a bit of ribbon on a clean tunic. Mud and abnegation and dear whiskey and England full of your beastly expeditionary forces. You were better than Canadians, though, he admitted. Not so damned many of you. 'Twas a priceless war, eh? I like a bit of red myself, he confided. Staff tabs worth 2 on the breast. Only see the breast from one side. Ribbon's good in peacetime, however. But even peace can't last forever, can it? The Semitic man added. It'll last a while, this one. Can't have another war right off. Too many would stop away. Regulars jump in and get all the cushy jobs right off. Learned in the last one, you know. And the others would all get their backs up and refuse to go again. He mused for a moment. The last one made war so damned unpopular with the proletariat. They overdid it, like the showman who fills his stage so full chaps can see through into the wings. You folks were pretty good at war bunk yourselves, weren't you? Fairchild said. War bunk, repeated Major Ayres. Fairchild explained. We didn't pay money for it, though, Major Ayres answered. We only gave ribbons. Pretty good whiskey, eh? If you want me to, Jenny said. I'll put it away in my room somewheres. Pete crammed it down on his head, holding his head tilted rigidly a little to windward. The wind was eating his cigarette right out of his mouth. He held his hand as a shield, smoking behind his hand. It's all right, he answered. Where'd you put it anyway? Somewheres. I'd just kind of put it away somewheres. The wind was in her dress, moulding it, and clasping her hands about the rail, she let herself swing backward to the full stretch of her arms while the wind moulded her thighs. Pete's coat buttoned, ballooned its vented, flaring skirts. Yes, he said, I can just kind of put it away myself when I want. Look out, kid. Jenny had drawn herself up to the rail again. The rail was breast-high to her, but by hooking her legs over the lower one, she could draw herself upward, and by creasing her young belly over the top one, she leaned far out over the water. The water sheared away, creaming, the white fading through milky jade to blue again, and a thin spray whipped from it, scuttering like small shot. Come on, get back on the boat. We're not riding the Blyants this trip. Gee, said Jenny, creasing her young belly, hanging out over the water while wind moulded and flipped her little skirt, revealing the pink backs of her knees above her stockings. The helmsman thrust his head out and yelled at her, and Jenny craned her neck to look back at him, swinging her blown, drowsy hair. Keep your shirt on, brother, Pete shouted back at the helmsman for form's sake. What'd I tell you, dumbness? He hissed at Jenny, pulling her down. Come on now. It's their boat. Try to act like somebody. I wasn't hurting it, Jenny answered placidly. I guess I can do this, can't I? She let her body swing back again at the stretch of her arms. Say, there he is with that saw again. I wonder what he's making. Whatever it is, you probably don't need any help from us, Pete answered. Say, how long did she say this is going to last? I don't know. Maybe they'll dance or something after a while. This is kind of funny, ain't it? They're not going anywhere and they don't do anything. Kind of like a movie or something. Jenny brooded softly, gazing at the nephew where he sat with his saw in the lee of the wheelhouse, immersed and oblivious. If I was rich, I'd stay where I could spend it, not like this, where there's not even anything to look at. Yeah, if you were rich, you'd buy a lot of clothes and jewelry and an automobile. And then what did you do? Wear your clothes out sitting in the automobile, huh? I guess so. I wouldn't buy a boat anyway. I think he's kind of good looking. Not very snappy looking, though. I wonder what he's making. Better go ask him, Pete answered shortly. I don't know. I don't want to know anyhow. I was just kind of wondering. She swung herself slowly at arm's length, against the wind slowly until she swung herself over beside Pete, leaning her back against him. Go on and ask him, Pete insisted, his elbows hooked over the rail, ignoring Jenny's soft weight. Pretty boy like him won't bite you. I don't mind being bit, Jenny replied placidly. Peter? Get away, kid. I'm respectable, Pete told her. Try your pretty boy. See if you can compete with that saw. I like peppy-looking men, Jenny remarked. She sighed. Gee, I wish there was a movie to go to or something. I wonder what he's making. What horsepower does she develop? The nephew asked, raising his voice above the deep vibration of the engine, staring at it entranced. It was clean as a watch, nickeled and red-leaded, a patent on brooding power beneath a thin film of golden lubricating oil, like the film of moisture on a splendid animal functioning, physical with perfection. The captain, in a once white cap with a tarnished emblem on the visor and a thin undershirt stained with grease, told him how much horsepower she developed. He stood in a confined atmosphere, oppressive with energy, an ecstatic tingling that penetrated to the core of his body, giving to his entrails a slightly unpleasant sensation of lightness, staring at the engine with rapture. It was as beautiful as a racehorse, and in a way terrifying, since with all its implacable soulless power there was no motion to be seen save a trivial nervous flickering of rocker arms, a thin bright clicking that rode just above the remote contemplative thunder of it. The keel plates shook with it. The very bulkheads trembled with it, as though a moment were approaching when it would burst the steel as a cocoon is burst, and soar upward and outward on dreadful and splendid wings of energy and flame. But the engine was bolted down with huge bolts, clean and firm and neatly red-leaded, bolts that nothing could break, as firmly fixed as the nethermost foundations of the world. Across the engine, above the flickering rocker arms, the captain's soiled cap appeared and vanished. The nephew moved carefully around the engine, following. There was a port at the height of his eye, and he saw beyond it sky bisected by a rigid curving sweep of water, stiff with a fading energy like bronze. The captain was busy with a wisp of cotton waste, hovering about the engine, dabbling at its immaculate anatomy, with needless maternal infatuation. The nephew watched with interest. The captain leaned nearer, wiped his waist through a small accumulation of grease at the base of a pushrod, and raised it to the light. The nephew approached, peering over the captain's shoulder. It was a tiny speck, quite dead. What is it, Josh? His sister said, breathing against his neck. The nephew turned sharply. Gabriel's pants, he said. What are you doing down here? Who told you to come down here? I wanted to come too, she answered, crowding against him. What is it, Captain? What have you and Gus got? Here, her brother thrust at her. Get on back on deck where you belong. You haven't got any business down here. What is it, Captain? She repeated, ignoring him. The captain extended his rag. Did the engine kill it? She asked. Gee, I wish we could get all of them down here and lock the door for a while, don't you? She stared at the engine, at the flickering rocker arms. She squealed. Look how fast they're going. It's going awfully fast, isn't it, Captain? Yes, ma'am, the captain replied. Pretty fast. What's her bore and stroke? The nephew asked. Captain examined a dial. Then he turned a valve slightly. Then he examined the dial again. The nephew repeated his question, and the captain told him her bore and stroke. She revs up pretty well, don't she? The nephew suggested after a while. Yes, sir, the captain answered. He was busy doing something with two small wrenches, and the nephew offered to help. His sister followed, curious and intent. I expect you'd better let me do it alone, the captain said, courteous and firm. I know her better than you, I expect. Suppose you and the young lady stand over there just a little. You sure do keep her clean, Captain, and he said, clean enough to eat off of, isn't she? The captain thawed. She's worth keeping clean. Best marine engine made. German. She cost $12,000. Gee, Denise remarked in a hushed tone. Her brother turned upon her, pushing her before him from the room. Look here, he said fiercely, his voice shaking when they were again in the passage. What are you doing following me around? What did I tell you I was going to do if you followed me any more? I wasn't following you. Yes, you were, he interrupted, shaking her. Following me. You. I just wanted to come too. Besides, it's Aunt Pat's boat, it's not yours. I've got as much right down there as you have. Oh, get on up on deck. Then if I catch you trailing round behind me again. His voice merged into a dire and nameless threat. The niece turned toward the companionway. Oh, haul in your sheet. You're jibbing. End of section 13. Read by Sandra. Section 14 of Mosquitos. First day. 4 and 6 p.m. 4 o'clock. They sat at their bridge on deck, shuffling, dealing, speaking in sparse monosyllables. The Nausicaa surged sedately onward under the blue, drowsing afternoon. Far away on the horizon, the lazy smudge of the Mandeville ferry. Mrs. Morier, on the outskirt of the game, gazed at intervals abstractedly into space. From below there came an indistinguishable sound, welling at intervals and falling, and Mr. Taliaferro grew restive. The sound died away at intervals, swelled again. The Nausicaa paced sedately on. They played their hands, dealt, and shuffled again. Mr. Taliaferro was becoming distrait. Every once in a while his attention strayed, and returning found Mrs. Morier's eyes upon him, coldly contemplative, and he bent anew over his cards. The indistinguishable sound welled once more. Mr. Taliaferro trumped his partner's queen, and the gentlemen in their bathing suits surged up the stairs. They completely ignored the card players, passing aft in a body and talking loudly, something about a wager. They paused at the rail upon which the steward leaned at the moment. Here they clotted momentarily when Major Ayres detached himself from the group and flung himself briskly and awkwardly overboard. "Hooray!" roared Fairchild. "He wins!" Mrs. Morier had raised her face when they passed. She had spoken to them and had watched them when they halted, and she saw Major Ayres leap overboard with a shocked and dreadful doubt of her own eyesight. Then she screamed. The steward stripped off his jacket, detached and flung a lifebelt, then followed himself, diving outward and away from the screw. "2 of 'em!" Fairchild howled with joy. "Pick you up when we come back," he megaphoned through his hands. Major Ayres came up in the wake of the yacht, swimming strongly. The Nausicaa circled. The telegraph rang. Major Ayres and the steward reached the lifebelt together, and before the yacht lost way completely, the helmsman and the deckhand had swung the tender overside, and soon they hauled Major Ayres savagely into the small boat. The Nausicaa was hove to. Mrs. Morier was helped below to her cabin, where her irate captain attended her presently. Meanwhile, the other gentlemen plunged in and began to cajole the ladies, so the rest of the party went below and donned their bathing suits. Jenny didn't have one. Her sole preparation for the voyage had consisted of the purchase of a lipstick and a comb. The niece loaned Jenny hers, and in this borrowed suit, which fit her a shade too well, Jenny clung to the gunwale of the tender, clutching Pete's hand and floating her pink and white face like a toy balloon unwetted above the water, while Pete sat in the boat fully dressed even to his hat, glowering. Mr. Taliaferro's bathing suit was red, giving him a bizarre, desiccated look, like a recently extracted tooth. He wore also a red rubber cap, and he let himself gingerly into the water, feet first, from the stern of the tender. And here he clung beside the placid Jenny, trying to engage her in small talk beneath Pete's thunderous regard. The ghostly poet in his ironed serge. He didn't swim, lay again at full length on 4 chairs, craning his pale, prehensile face above the bathers. Fairchild looked more like a walrus than ever, a deceptively sedate walrus of middle age, suddenly evincing a streak of demoniac puerility. He wallowed and splashed, heavily playful, and seconded by Major Ayres, annoyed the ladies by pinching them under water and by splashing them, wetting Pete liberally where he sat smouldering with Jenny clinging to his hand and squealing, trying to protect her makeup. The Semitic man paddled around with that rather ludicrous intentness of a fat man swimming. Gordon sat on the rail looking on. Fairchild and Major Ayres at last succeeded in driving the ladies back into the tender, about which they splashed and yapped with the tactless playfulness of dogs, while Pete, refraining, "Look out, God damn you! Look out, Christ, what you're doing! Look out!" struck at their fingers with one of his discarded and sopping shoes. Above this one-sided merriment, the niece appeared poised upon the top of the wheelhouse, unseen by those in the water. They were aware first of a white arrow arcing down the sky. The water took it lazily, and while they stared at the slow green vortex where it had entered, there was a commotion behind Fairchild, and as he opened his mouth, his gaping surprise vanished beneath the surface. In its place, the niece balanced momentarily on something under the water when she fell plunging in the direction of Major Ayres' yet passive astonishment. The ladies screamed with delight. Major Ayres also vanished, and the niece plunged on. Fairchild appeared presently, coughing and gasping, and climbed briskly into the tender where Mr. Taliaferro, with admirable presence of mind, already was, having deserted Jenny without a qualm. "I've got enough," Fairchild said when he could speak. Major Ayres, however, accepted the challenge. The niece trod water and awaited him. "Drown him, Pat!" the ladies shrieked. Just before he reached her, her dark, wet head vanished, and for a while Major Ayres plunged about in a kind of act of resignation. Then he vanished again, and the niece, clad in a suit of her brother's underwear, a knitted sleeveless jersey and short, narrow trunks, surged out of the water and stood erect on his shoulders. Then she put her foot on the top of his head and thrust him deeper yet. Then she plunged on and trod water again. Major Ayres reappeared at last, already headed for the boat. He had enough also, and the gentleman dragged him aboard, and they dripped across the deck and passed below to the derision of the ladies. The ladies got aboard themselves. Pete, standing erect in the tender, was trying to haul Jenny out of the water. She hung like an expensive doll confection from his hands, raising at lax intervals a white, lovely leg, while Mr. Taliaferro, kneeling, pawed at her shoulders. Come on, Pete hissed at her. The niece swam up and thrust at Jenny's sweet thighs until Jenny tumbled at last into the tender in a soft blonde abandon, a charming awkwardness. The niece held the tender steady while they boarded the yacht, then she slid skillfully out of the water, sleek and dripping as a seal, and as she swung her short, coarse hair back from her face, she saw hands, and Gordon's voice said, "Give me your hands." She clasped his hard wrists and felt herself flying. The setting sun came level into his beard and upon all his tall, lean body, and dripping water on the deck she stood and looked at him with admiration. "Gee, you're hard," she said. She touched his forearms again, then she struck him with her fist on his hard, high chest. "Do it again, will you?" "Swing you again?" he asked, but she was already in the tender, extending her arms while sunset was a moist gold sheathing her. Again that sensation of flying, of space and motion, and his hard hands coming into it, and for an instant she stopped in mid-flight, hand to hand and arm braced to arm, high above the deck while water dripping from her turned to gold as it fell. Sunset was in his eyes, a glory he could not see, and her taut, simple body, almost breastless and with the fleeting hips of a boy, was in ecstasy in golden marble, and in her face the passionate ecstasy of a child. At last her feet touched the deck again, and she turned. She sped toward the companionway, and as she flashed downward, the last of the sun slid upon her and over her with joy. Then she was gone, and Gordon stood looking at the wet and simple prints of her naked feet on the deck. 6 o'clock. They had raised land just about the time Major Ayres won his wager, and while the last of day drained out of the world, the Nausicaa at half speed forged slowly into a sluggish river mouth, broaching a timeless violet twilight between solemn bearded cypresses motionless as bronze. You might, by listening, have heard a slow requiem in this tall nave, might have heard here the chanted orisons of the dark heart of the world turning toward slumber. The world was becoming dimensionless. The tall, bearded cypresses drew nearer one to another across the wallowing river with the soulless implacability of pagan gods, gazing down upon this mahogany and brass intruder with inscrutable unalarm. The water was like oil, and the Nausicaa forged onward without any sensation of motion, through a corridor without ceiling or floor. Mr. Taliaferro stood at the stern rail beside Jenny and her morose-hatted duenna. In the dusk, Jenny's white troubling placidity bloomed like a heavy flower, pervading and rife like an odor lazier, heavier than that of lilies. Pete loomed beyond her. The last light in the world was concentrated in the implacable blaze of his hat, leaving the atmosphere about them darker still. And in the weary passion of August and nightfall, Mr. Taliaferro's dry, interminable voice fell, lower and lower, and finally ceased altogether. And abruptly, becoming aware of an old mislaid sorrow, he slapped suddenly at the back of his hand with consternation, remarking at the same time that Pete was also restive, and that Jenny was agitating herself as though she were rubbing her body against her clothing from within. Then, as if at a signal, they were all about them, unseen, with a dreadful bucolic intentness, unlike their urban cousins, making no sound. Jenny and Pete and Mr. Taliaferro evacuated the deck. At the companionway, the ghostly poet joined them hurriedly, flapping his handkerchief about his face and neck and the top of his unnurtured, evaporating head. At that instant, Mrs. Morier's voice arose from somewhere in astonished adjuration, and presently the Nausicaa put about and felt her way back to open water and stood out to sea, and not at half speed either. End of section 14, read by Sandra. Section 15 of Mosquitos by William Faulkner. First day, 7 o'clock. Years ago, Mrs. Morier had learned that unadulterated fruit juice was salutary, nay, necessary to a nautical life, a piece of information strange, irrelevant at first draught, yet on second thought quite possible, not to mention pleasant in contemplation. So she had accepted it, taking it unto her and making of it an undeviating marine conviction. Hence there was grapefruit again for dinner. She was going to inoculate them first, then take chances. Fairchild's gang was ultimately started from its lair in his quarters. The other guests were already seated, and they regarded the newcomers with interest and trepidation, and on Mrs. Moyer's part with actual alarm. "Here comes the dog watch," Mrs. Wiseman remarked brightly. "It's the gentleman, isn't it? We haven't seen any gentlemen since we left New Orleans. Hey, Dorothy." Her brother grinned at her sadly. "How about Mark and Taliaferro?" "Oh, Mark's a poet. That lets him out. And Ernest isn't a poet, so that lets him out too," she replied with airy, feminine logic. "Isn't that right, Mark?" "I'm the best poet in New Orleans," the ghostly young man said heavily, mooning his pale, prehensile face at her. "We were kind of wondering where you were, Mark," Fairchild told the best poet in New Orleans. "We got the idea you were supposed to be on the boat with us. Too bad you couldn't come," he continued tediously. "Maybe Mark couldn't find himself in time," the Semitic man suggested, taking his seat. "He's found his appetite, though," Fairchild replied. "Maybe he'll find the rest of himself laying around somewhere nearby." He seated himself and stared at the plate before him. He murmured, "Well, well," with abstraction. His companions found seats, and Major Ayres stared at his plate. He murmured, "Well, well," also. Mrs. Morier chewed her lip, nervously putting her hand on Mr. Taliaferro's sleeve. Major Ayres murmured, "It does look familiar, doesn't it?" And Fairchild said, "Why, it's grapefruit. I can tell every time." He looked at Major Ayres. "I'm not going to eat mine now. I'm going to put it away and save it." Right you are, agreed Major Ayres readily. Save 'em by all means. He set his grapefruit carefully to one side. Advise you people to do the same, he added at large. Save them? Mrs. Maurier repeated in astonishment. Why, there are more of them. We have several crates. Fairchild wagged his head at her. I can't risk it. They might be lost overboard or something, and us miles from land. I'm going to save mine. Major Ayres offered a suggestion. Save the rinds, anyway. Might need 'em. Never can tell what might happen at sea, you know, he said owlishly. Sure, Fairchild agreed. Might need 'em in a pinch to prevent constipation. Mrs. Maurier clasped Mr. Taliaferro's arm again. Mr. Taliaferro, she whispered imploringly. Mr. Taliaferro sprang to the breach. Now that we are all together at last, he began, clearing his throat, the Commodore wishes us to choose our first port of call. In other words, people, where shall we go tomorrow? He looked from face to face about the table. Why, nowhere, answered Fairchild with surprise. We just came from somewhere yesterday, didn't we? You mean today, Mrs. Wiseman told him. We left New Orleans this morning. Oh, did we? Well, it takes a long time to spend the afternoon, don't it? But we don't want to go anywhere, do we? Oh, yes, Mr. Taliaferro contradicted him smoothly. Tomorrow we're going up the Tchufuncta River and spend the day fishing. Our plan was to go up the river and spend the night, but this was found impossible. So we shall go up tomorrow. Is this unanimous, or shall we call for a ballot? Gabriel's pants, the niece said to Jenny. I itch just to think about that, don't you? Fairchild brightened. Up the Tchufuncta, he repeated. Why, that's where the Jackson place is. Maybe Al's at home. Major Ayres must meet Al Jackson, Julius. Al Jackson, Major Ayres repeated. The best poet in New Orleans groaned, and Mrs. Wiseman said, Good Lord, Dawson. Sure, the one I was telling you about at lunch, you know. Ah, yes, the alligator chap, eh? Mrs. Moyer exclaimed. Mr. Taliaferro again. Very well, Mr. Taliaferro said loudly. That's settled then. Fishing has it, and in the meantime, the Commodore invites you all to a dancing party on deck immediately after dinner. So finish your dinner, people. Fairchild, you are to lead the grand march. Sure, Fairchild agreed again. Yes, that's the one. His father has a fish ranch up there. That's where Al got his start, and now he's the biggest fishard in the world. Did you see the sunset this evening, Major Ayres? Mrs. Wiseman asked loudly. Deliciously messy, wasn't it? Nature getting even with Turner, the poet suggested. That will take years and years, Mrs. Wiseman answered. Mrs. Moyer sailed in, gushing. Our southern sunsets, Major Ayres. But Major Ayres was staring at Fairchild. Fishered? He murmured. Sure, like the old cattle ranches out west, you know. But instead of a cattle ranch, Al Jackson has got a fish ranch out in the wide open spaces of the Gulf of Mexico, where men are sharks, put in Mrs. Wiseman. Don't leave that out. Major Ayres stared at her. Sure, where men are men, that's where this beautiful blonde girl comes in. Like Jenny yonder. Maybe Jenny's the one. Are you the girl, Jenny? Major Ayres now stared at Jenny. Jenny was gazing at the narrator, her blue, ineffable eyes quite round, holding a piece of bread in her hand. Sir, she said at last, are you the girl that lives on that Jackson fish ranch out in the Gulf of Mexico? I live on Esplanade, Jenny said after a while, tentatively. Mr. Fairchild, Mrs. Moyer exclaimed. Mr. Taliaferro said, My dear sir. No, I reckon you are not the one, or you'd know it. I don't imagine that even Claude Jackson could live on a fish ranch in the Gulf of Mexico and not know it. This girl is from Brooklyn anyway, a society girl. She went down there to find her brother. Her brother had just graduated from reform school, and so his old man sent him down there for the Jacksons to make a fishard out of him. He hadn't shown any aptitude for anything else, you see, and his old man knew it didn't take much intelligence to herd a fish. His sister... But I say, Major Ayres interrupted, why do they herd their fish? They round 'em up and brand 'em, you see. Al Jackson brands. Brand 'em. Sure, Marks him so he can tell this fish from ordinary wild fish, mavericks they call him, and now he owns nearly all the fish in the world. A fish millionaire, even if he is fish poor right now. Wherever you see a marked fish, it's one of Al Jackson's. Marks his fish, eh? Sure, not just their tails. Mr. Fairchild, Mrs. Morey said. But our fish at home have notched tails, Major Ayres objected. Well, they are Jackson fish that have strayed off the range, then. Why doesn't he establish a European agent? The ghostly poet asked viciously. Major Ayres stared about, from face to face. I say, he began. He stuck there. The hostess rose decisively. Come, people, let's go on deck. No, the niece said quickly. Go on, tell us some more. Mrs. Wiseman rose also. Dawson, she said firmly, shut up. We simply cannot stand any more. This afternoon has been too trying. Come on, let's go up, she said, herding the ladies firmly out of the room, taking Mr. Taliaferro along also. End of section 15, read by Sandra. Section 16 of Mosquitos by William Faulkner. First day, 9 p.m. He needed a bit of wire. He had reached that impasse familiar to all creators where he could not decide which of a number of things to do next. His object had attained that stage of completion in which the simplicity of the initial impulse dissolves into a number of trivial necessary details, and lying on his bunk in the cabin, he and Mr. Taliaferro shared his saw at hand and a thin litter of sawdust and shavings well impermeating the bedclothing. He held his wooden cylinder to the small, inadequate light and decided that he could do with a bit of stiff wire or something of that nature. He swung his legs out of the berth and flowed to the floor in a single beautiful motion, and crossing the room on his bare feet, he searched Mr. Taliaferro's effects without success, so he passed from the cabin. Still on his bare feet, he went along the passage, and opening another door, he let subdued light from the passage into a room filled with snoring, discerning vaguely the sleeper, and on a peg in the wall a stained white cap. Captain's room, he decided, leaving the door open and traversing the room silently to another door. There was a dim, small light in this room, gleaming dully on the viscid anatomy of the now motionless engine, but he ignored the engine now, going about his search with businesslike expedition. There was a wooden cabinet against the wall. Some of the drawers were locked. He rummaged through the others, pausing at times to raise certain objects to the light for closer inspection, discarding them again. He closed the last drawer and stood with his hand on the cabinet, examining the room. A piece of wire would do, a short piece of stiff wire. There were wires on one wall passing among and between switches, but these were electric wires and probably indispensable. Electric wires. Battery room. It must be there beyond that small door. It was there, a shadow-filled cubbyhole smelling of acids, of decomposition, a verdigris of decay. Plenty of wires here, but no loose ones. He stared around and presently saw something upright and gleaming dully. It was a piece of mechanism, steel, smooth and odorless and rather comforting in this tomb of smells, and he examined it curiously, striking matches. And there, attached to it, was exactly what he needed, a small, straight steel rod. I wonder what it does, he thought. It looked a winch of some kind, maybe. But what would they want with a winch down here? Something they don't use much, evidently, he assured himself. Too clean, cleaner than the engine, not greased all over like the engine. They mustn't hardly ever use it. Or a pump. A pump, that's what it is. They won't need a pump once a year. Not any bilging a boat kept up like a grand piano. Anyhow, they couldn't possibly need it before tomorrow, and I'll be through with it then. Chances are they wouldn't miss it if I kept it altogether. The rod came off easily. Plenty of wrenches in the cabinet, and he just unscrewed the nuts at each end of the rod and lifted it out. He paused again, holding the rod in his hand. Suppose he were to injure the rod some way. He hadn't considered that, and he stood turning the rod this way and that in his fingers, watching dull gleams of light on its slender, polished length. It was so exactly what he needed. Steel, too. Good steel. It cost $12,000. And if you can't get good steel for that... He put his tongue on it. It tasted principally of machine oil, but it must be good hard steel, costing $12,000. I guess I can't hurt anything that costs $12,000. especially by just using it one time. "If they need it tomorrow, I'll be through it anyway," he said aloud. He replaced the wrenches. His mouth tasted of machine oil and he spat. The captain yet snored, and he passed through the captain's room on his bare feet, closing the door thoughtfully so the light from the passage wouldn't disturb the sleeper. He slipped the rod into his pocket. His hands were greasy, and so he wiped them on the seat of his trousers. He paused again at the galley door where the steward was still busy over the sink. The steward stopped long enough to find a candle for him. Then he returned to his room. He lit the candle, drew Mr. Taliaferro's suitcase from beneath the bunk, and, dripping a bit of hot wax onto it, he fixed the candle upright. Then he got Mr. Taliaferro's pigskin enclosed shaving kit and propped the rod upon it with one end of the rod in the candle flame. His mouth still tasted of machine oil, so he climbed onto his berth and spat through the port, discovering as he did so that the port was screened. "It'll dry, though." He touched the rod. It was getting warm, but he wanted it red hot. His mouth yet tasted of machine oil, and he remembered the other cigarette. It was in the same pocket in which he had had the rod, and it too was slightly reminiscent of machinery, but the burning tobacco would soon kill that. The rod was getting pretty hot, so he fetched the wooden cylinder from the bunk, and laying the cigarette on the edge of the suitcase, he picked up the rod and held its heated end firmly against the selected spot on the cylinder, and soon a thin thread of smoke rose, curling into the windless air. Smoke had a faint odor like that of scorching leather in it also. Machine oil, probably. End of section 16. Read by Sandra.